Announcing the arrival of Yang Amat Berhormat Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, Prime National Anthem. Please be seated. Yang Amat Berhormat Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, Prime Minister of Malaysia. Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Haji Muhammad Khalid Haji Nordin, Minister of Higher Education. Honorable Tan Sri Samsudin Osman, President of International Islamic University Malaysia, Your Excellencies and Honorable IIUM Board of Governors, Ambassadors and High Commissioners, Honorable Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector of IIUM, Honorable Professor Emeritus Dato Dr. Osman Bakar, holder of Al-Ghazali Chair of Epistemology, Civilizational Studies and Renewal, ISTAC-IIUM, honorable panelists and guests, professors, staff and students of IIUM, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, and a very good morning. The event is now commenced with a recitation of dua by Professor Dr. Akmal Huzairi Abdul Rahman, the Deputy Rector, Student Development and Community Engagement, IIUM. File tafaddal, Prof.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillahil Ameen. المبعوث رحمة للعالمين وعلى من واله إلى يوم الدين. اللهم أنت ربنا لا إله إلا أنت خلقتنا ونحن عبادك وعلى عهدك ووعدك ما استطعنا نعوذ بك من شر ما صنعنا نبوء لك بنعمتك علينا ونبوء بذنوبنا فاغفر لنا إنه لا يغفر الذنوب إلا أنت. اللهم إنا نسألك الخير كله عاجلا وآجلا ما علمنا منه وما لم نعلم ونعوذ بك من الشر كله عاجلا وآجلا ما علمنا منه وما لم نعلم. O Allah, we beg you to make our requests as the best of our supplications. We beg you for the best success, the best duty and the best rewards. O Allah, we beg you as the servants of this ummah to make our scales heavy with rewards. Make us patient in our actions, passionate in our works, dedicated in our jobs, knowledgeable in our fields, humble in our behavior, strong in our faith, compassionate to our subjects, and tolerant to our differences. We seek refuge in you, Allah, from knowledge which does not benefit, from hearts which do not tremble, from an ego which is not stated, and from a supplication which is not accepted. O Allah, we seek refuge in you from the evil of what we did, and from the evil of what we did not do, from the evil of what we know, and from the evil of what we did not know. O Allah, Lord of the merciful, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things that we can, and wisdom to know the difference. O Allah, we beg you to shower your mercy continuously on both our scholars and leaders, our ulama and umara. Make the achievements of this country the best of all achievements and its leaders, its actions as the best of all actions, its deeds as the best of all deeds. O Allah, you are the Lord of power and glory. Bless us in our efforts to conduct this event that we are all here for this morning. Guide us among those whom you guide and bestow upon us the best result and outcome from our efforts in this world, and shield us from calamity and punishment of the hereafter. Allahumma ja'al jama'ana hadha jama'an marhuma وتفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل فينا شقيا ولا محروما. اللهم أحسن عاقبتنا في الأمور كلها وأجرنا من خزي الدنيا وعذاب الآخرة. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Waalaikum salam. Jazakallah, Prof. Ladies and gentlemen, we are indeed honored to have the presence of Yang Amat Berhormat Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, to launch a book and forum entitled Knowledge, Tradition and Civilizations, Essays in Honor of Professor Dato Dr. Osman Bakar. The presence of Yang Amat Berhormat Datuk Sri Anwar could also regard as a homecoming for him, as he was the second president of IIUM. Welcome home, Datuk Sri. We hope it is not too late for us to also congratulate Datuk Sri on his appointment as the 10th Prime Minister of Malaysia. May Allah ease your endeavor as our leader, insyaAllah. Ladies and gentlemen, praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His blessing that we are able to gather here today to celebrate the writings of Professor Emeritus Dato Dr. Osman Bakar, holder of Al-Ghazali Chair of Epistemology, Civilizational Studies and Renewal in ISTAC-IIUM. ISTAC-IIUM is also proud to organize this Fashrif in honor of Professor Emeritus Dato Dr. Osman Bakar for his special and rare work compiled in this book with contribution from all colleagues of his who are great scholars and achievers in the world, including our beloved Yang Amat Berhormat Datuk Seri Prime Minister himself. Thank you, Datuk Seri. And ladies and gentlemen, I now present you Well, ladies and gentlemen, let us now get back to agenda. I now have the pleasure to invite Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Samsudin Osman, President of IIUM, to greet the audience. Please welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya wa mursalin Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang Amat Berhormat Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim, Prime Minister of Malaysia. Yang Berhormat Dato Sri Haji Muhammad Khalid Nordin, Minister of Higher Education. Esteemed members of IIUM Board of Governors. Yang Bahagia Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato Zulkifli Razak, Rector of IIUM. Yang Bahagia Professor Emeritus Dato Dr. Osman Bakar, holder of Al-Ghazali Chair of Epistemology, Civilizational Studies and Renewal, IIUM. Excellencies, Ambassadors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to begin first by expressing all my praise and gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His blessings and mercy that we could gather in this auspicious hall for this momentous ceremony. On behalf of the International Islamic University of Malaysia, I would like to welcome all distinguished guests to the book launch today. Our special welcome, or should I say welcome home, is reserved for Yang Amat Berhormat Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim, the Prime Minister who is well known to have associated with IIUM for a long time, right from the beginning of its establishment 40 years ago. And when Yang Amat Berhormat Dato Seri was appointed as the second president of IIUM in year 1998 until the year 1999. The Prime Minister has kindly agreed to come to ISTAC, the University Scale campus, for a purely academic reason, which is to launch a festival in honor of Professor Emeritus Dato Osman Bakar, a member of the academic staff of ISTAC-IIUM, who currently holds the Al-Ghazali Chair of Epistemology and Civilizational Studies and Renewal. We laud the exemplary attitude of Yang Amat Berhormat, the Prime Minister, towards knowledge and his commitment to the advancement of knowledge. The fact that despite his extremely busy schedule running the affairs of the country, he finds time to launch an academic book is clear proof of his love for knowledge and his respect for the scholars. In fact, he has shown himself to be a patron of knowledge ever since he became a public and government leader. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe it's not too late to congratulate Yang Amat Berhormat Dato Seri Anwar on his appointment as the 10th Prime Minister of Malaysia. And this has to be spoken in Malay. Kami mendoakan yang terbaik untuknya. Semoga Allah permudahkan segala urusan pentadbirannya. And we wish to congratulate Professor Emeritus Dato Dr. Osman Bakar for being honored by the international community of scholars in appreciation of his contributions to the field of knowledge. We understand that the festival is contributed by 25 scholars, academics, and intellectual activists from the different continents, and that YB Prime Minister is one of the contributors to this book. Once again, a great thank you to Yang Amat Berhormat Prime Minister for his gracious presence at this meaningful festival launching event. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great honor that I call the most important person today, none other but Professor Emeritus Dato Dr. Osman Bakar, holder of Al-Ghazali Chair, ISTAC-IIUM, to share his pearls of wisdom to us. Please welcome Professor Dato Osman.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya mursalin. Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning. Yang Amat Berhormat Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim, Prime Minister of Malaysia, Yang Berhormat Dato Seri Haji Muhammad Khalid Haji Nordin, Minister of Higher Education, Honorable Tan Sri Samsudin Osman, President of International Islamic University, Malaysia, Your Excellencies and honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. The book that is shortly to be launched this morning by Yang Amat Berhormat Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim certainly means a lot to me personally. After all, it is a book that is published as a fashrift or a collection of essays contributed by many scholars in my honor. I am deeply moved by the scholarly honor accorded to me through this special book. Its contributors, 25 distinguished individuals in all, are my friends and colleagues in the academia and fellow activists in public intellectual life. They include my former teacher, university professor, Syed Hossein Nasser, and several of my former students. They come from 12 different countries, and they are established professors and intellectual activists in many fields of study. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the contributors for their precious essays. There are several notable individuals to whom I would like to express my special gratitude for making possible the publication of the Fashrif. The idea to have the Fashrif came from Dr. Muhammad Yaqub Mirza and his son, Dr. Yunus Mirza. Dr. Yaqub is a senior figure in the IIIT organization, whom I've known for a long time, and whom I met rather frequently during the period of my PhD study at Temple University, Philadelphia. That was in the early 1980s. As for Dr. Yunus Mirza, he was my student at Georgetown University, Washington, D.C., when I was the holder of the Malaysia Chair of Islam in Southeast Asia at that university. They felt that with my scholarly output, I deserved the publication of Fashrif in my honor. I accept the kind offer with deep humility. Dr. Yunus assured me that the Center for Islam in the Contemporary World, CICW, founded by his father at Shenandoah University, Virginia, could help fund the Fashrif project. I wish to thank CICW, especially Dr. Ermin Sinanovic, its executive director, for facilitating the delivery of the promised fund. Dr. Yunus and I agreed that a good editor is essential if the Fashrif is to be of admirable quality as well as to be delivered within the shortest possible period. Professor Syed Khairuddin Al-Junaid at the National University of Singapore was our first choice. We consider him to be the best person for the editorial task. It was helpful that Dr. Yunus knew Professor Khairuddin, as the latter had served as the Malaysia chair at Georgetown University, my successor, and also the successor of Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim. And I know Professor Khairuddin very well. He is a prolific scholar. And he has good international experience in scholarly editorial work. Furthermore, he is familiar with my writings, my works. So when I conveyed to him our invitation, he gladly accepted it, and this delighted us very much. I was impressed with Professor Khairuddin's editorial work. He was efficient, has good international academic network, and abundant intellectual energy. In consultation with me, he helped assemble a wonderful group of contributors representing different countries, religions, cultures, and a wide spectrum of academic disciplines and fields of study. As is usually the case with Fashrifs, contributors are expected to write some forms of intellectual or scholarly responses to one or more aspects of the life and works of the honoree, including even personal ones. But the responses are largely sympathetic and friendly, not critical, though in other places they may be very critical. The Fashrif to be launched is precisely this kind of work. Within less than a year, Professor Khairuddin was able to collect all the promised essays from their contributors, execute the necessary editorial work in close rapport with them, and submit the final edited work to the publisher. I wish to record my sincere appreciation of the superb, engaging work he had conducted with the contributors and the publisher. I can assure you after this, Dr. Khairuddin received a lot of letters trying nak meminang dia. I wish to record my appreciation of the super engaging work he had conducted with the contributors and also the publisher, Beacon Books, in the UK, under the leadership of Jamil Chisti, its founder. Among the contributors, I would like to make special mention of three of them. They are University Professor Syed Hossein Nasser, who graciously agreed to write a preface, Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim, who was very generous in his foreword, and Professor John Esposito, who kindly agreed to write an afterword. Some friends say, do we have an afterword? Well, since we have forward, we must have an afterword. Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim was very generous in his foreword, and Professor John Esposito, who kindly agreed to write an afterword. All these distinguished personalities, I'm fortunate to have been associated with for decades. Professor Nasser is generally regarded as one of the greatest Muslim thinkers of the 20th and 21st century. Indeed, he is one of the greatest contemporary thinkers by any standard. Thus, he is the first and also the only Muslim thinker in the world, to have achieved several scholarly feats. For example, he was the first and only Muslim philosopher to be given the honor of having a volume about him in the American-based series on living philosophers since its first volume in 1938. He is also the first traditionalist to be given the honor since the volume on Martin Buber in 1967. And is also the first and only Muslim scholar to have delivered the prestigious Gifford Lectures since it was established at the University of Edinburgh in 1889. I therefore consider myself to be very fortunate to have him as my doctoral supervisor and longtime teacher and friend, with whom I have collaborated many scholarly projects and activities. Although I have several other great Muslim scholars as my teacher, such as Professor Syed Muhammad Naqib Al-Atas and the late Professor Ismail Faruqi, I consider Professor Nasser as my leading teacher in Islamic philosophy and science and Islamic spirituality, especially Sufism. I owe a great debt to him in the advancement of my intellectual and scholarly career. My association with Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim is even longer, coming close to 60 years. First, as classmates at MCKK in the 1960s, as youth activists in ABIN in the 1970s, and subsequently association through frequent encounters between Anwar the politician, interested in intellectual issues, and Osman the academician, interested in political issues. But not sectarian politics. This is civilizational politics. Common idealism, common teachers, both formal and informal, and common aspirations have sustained our friendship until now. Professor Nasser is one of our common teachers, and sources of intellectual inspiration. To those who only see in Anwar Ibrahim the intelligent and smart politician, and who therefore question why he's included in this treasury, let me tell them this. Dato Seri Anwar is not only a politician, but also a public intellectual. Not only that, he is also a scholar. He has been visiting professor to several leading universities in the world, including Oxford and Georgetown. He has important writings to his credit, no less than any other professor, whom we call professor. He is a much sought speaker by universities in the West because of his rich experience in politics and governance. I see his inclusion in the Fashriq as something very significant and which I really appreciate. One other contributor to the Fashriq who shares the same length and similar kind of intellectual association with me as Dato Seri Anwar is Tunku Dato Dr. Muhammad Osman Sharifuddin, a luminary figure in the prestigious Academy of Science, Malaysia. As Professor Esposito, my association with him is also through academic links. We had Professor Faruqi as our mutual teacher. Professor Esposito is perhaps Professor Faruqi's most famous student. And not unrelatedly, Professor Esposito is widely seen as the non-Muslim scholar in the West who is most sympathetic to Islam. My closest relation with him was during my 5-year stint as Malaysia chair at Georgetown University. The aftermath of the September 11, 2001 tragedy had kept us closer together. We were queried by the media and the American public left and right about Islam. It was one of the most interesting and challenging times in my academic career, but it was also perhaps the most productive period of my scholarship. As the honoree of the Fashriq, I cannot hide my joy at seeing the testimonies of these three friends in their kind words about my intellectual life and scholarly career. Before I conclude, let me say a few words about the significance of the title of the Fashriq: Knowledge, Tradition, and Civilization. Reading the essays, the title appears as most apt. They remind me of my half-a-century intellectual journey, traversing the realm of ideas, best summarized as the deep interactions between knowledge, tradition, and civilization. My lifetime devotion is to discover the multifold and multidimensional relations between the human and the divine. The journey began with mathematics, leading to a personal discovery of God, Allah, as the supreme mathematician. It was what a joy to discover that God is the supreme mathematician. It was a discovery of the meaning of mathematics as Jacob's ladder, referring to a dream of the biblical Jacob and the Quran's prophet Yaqub. The dream about how to climb, to ascend the ladder of realities from the physical to the metaphysical, from the earth to the heavens. Discovering the meaning of mathematics as the queen of the sciences. The reality that makes mathematics the queen of the sciences, concerned with truth, power, and beauty. Al-Farabi showed me another ladder to ascend from the world of human society to the divine, namely the political ladder, which he describes as Madani. Forgive Dato Seri Anwar mentioning this. Dato Seri Anwar has been concerned with the relation between politics and the sacred and the Madani ladder. Madani is the way, is the ladder from the society of human being to the metaphysical world, to the divine world. In conclusion, I have an appeal to make to the Prime Minister, to Sri Anwar, and the Minister of Higher Education who is on the stage. Dato Sri Khalid. Islamic studies and studies of Islamic civilization have been going on, mushrooming in Malaysia in the last several decades. But critics of these courses abound. When did we last have a major review of these studies and courses? The answer is none. The answer is none. A thorough review is long overdue. Now that we have the new national policy on Malaysia Madani, which has civilizational implications, we urgently call for reforms in the teaching of Islamic thought and civilization in our colleges and universities. Let me now once again thank Professor Khairuddin, the editor, all essay contributors, especially Professor Nasser, Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim, Professor John Esposito, funders of the project, and Beacon Books, the publisher. Let me also thank IIUM, the president, rector, and staff for his generous support in organizing the book launch and the book discussion forum this afternoon. To the Dean and ISTAC family who have worked so hard, a big thank you. Setinggi-tinggi terima kasih. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Masya Allah. May Allah gives you strength and good health to continue contributing to the Ummah, Dato. Bandar Temeloh di negeri Pahang, di situ terletak Bukit Lada. Tempat lahir cendekiawan terbilang, Prof. Osman Bakar, itulah orangnya. Beli beras dan daun palas. Beli di Pekan Sari Cenor. Kerja keras pasti dibalas. Terus sukses sepanjang umur, insya-Allah. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Emeritus Dato Dr. Osman Bakar. Thank you once again, Prof. Dato. Ladies and gentlemen, now is another video presentation. Professor Syed Hussein Nas, Professor of Islamic Studies at George Washington University, a scholar who is close to Professor Dato Osman, could not be able to be with us today. But that is not a reason for not listening to his message. Praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us the knowledge in technology that enables us to stay connected. Thus, today, we are grateful to have Prof. Syed Hussein Nas to share with us his thoughts via a pre-recorded video. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly pay your attention to the screen for the video. And roll it, please. Roll the video, please. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, Your Excellency, Dato Shri Anwar Ibrahim, my greetings to you and my congratulations not to you but to the people of Malaysia who have chosen you as their Prime Minister. May you serve them well, which I'm sure you will do, and may all the obstacles upon your path be removed by God, and may you be a unifying force with this very dear and important part of the Islamic world, which is playing a role really above and beyond its size and population as far as the Islamic world as a whole is concerned. As also my salams to government officials, academics, and students who are present. I've been asked to say a few words on the occasion of the celebration of the life work and activities of Dr. Osman Bakar. And of course, I'm very glad to do so. I'm asked to say a few words about the question of Islam and Islamic civilization and why it still matters. But let me start with Dr. Bakar himself, and that will lead me to that. Malaysia is fortunate to have had an intellectual figure like him. I have known him for 40-some years, a long, long time. When I came into exile in America after the Iranian Revolution, I was teaching at Temple University early in the 80s. He became my student there as a PhD student, studied several years with me, did his doctoral thesis with me, and I've been in close association with him ever since, and have worked on many projects with him. He developed very rapidly, coming from a background in mathematics with intense interest in Islamic studies, developed very rapidly into a very fine scholar. He wrote his PhD thesis on the classification of the sciences in Islam under my care, which is still a classical book, a very, very precious piece of scholarship. And he later on developed interest in relation between Islam and Confucianism, considering the fact that Malaysia is really the natural link between the Confucian Chinese world and the Islamic world, because not only of its location, but the structure of its population. The work he's done is a very, very important one. And now there are other people in the Islamic world working on the subject, but he's been among the foremost to do so. He turned his attention to introducing the total tradition of Islamic philosophy into the Malay world, especially later Islamic thought, which had not been known to Malay scholars. And he at the same time brought out the significance of what we might call civilizational studies, which are in a sense a new field developing in which consideration is made not of linguistic units or ethnic units, but of civilizations as basis for study. And in the Islamic world, he's a pioneer in that subject. In fact, he is, along with Professor Latas, perhaps the two most important intellectual figures of Malaysia who have put Malaysia, you might say, on the map intellectually as far as the Islamic world is concerned. Traditionally and historically, the central area of the Islamic world between, let's say, what is today Pakistan or up to Delhi, to Cairo, in the east, to Cairo in the west, and including, of course, Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, and so forth in the middle, where the lands where the most important intellectual, philosophical, theological ideas were developed, and then they extended to the two limbs, to the two sides of the Islamic world, and except for the short period of Andalusian philosophy and intellectual activity science that took place in Iberia and Spain, practically all of the important intellectual figures of Islam came from this middle area. And what was done in those areas outside did not flow back into the center. The flow was always from the center outward. With the appearance of Dr. Atas and Dr. Bakar and a few other Malaysian scholars and now Indonesian scholars, for the first time Southeast Asia is put on the map, you might say, and the rest of the Islamic world has become cognizant of its intellectual activities and its intellectual importance. Anyway, I wish him a long life of service to the cause of truth, to the cause of Islamic culture, Islamic thought, and I want to thank Your Excellency for supporting, in fact, important intellectual and religious and philosophical currents and figures in Malaysia. We Muslims, unfortunately, have a bad habit of oftentimes waiting until somebody dies in order to appreciate them. It's much better to do so when they're alive. And what you're doing now sets an example, really, for the rest of the Islamic world in many ways. Now, in the few minutes that are left to me, I was supposed to talk about why the study of Islamic subjects and civilization still matters. Not only does it still matter, it matters much more than it did before. When colonialism came to parts of the Islamic world, including the Malay world, of course, the colonialists tried first of all to dilute the Malay population. They tried to belittle Islamic teachings. The universities that were created were really Western style, and Islamic subjects were not taught that seriously, and so forth and so on. All of these that we see throughout the colonial period. And everybody predicted that, especially Western Orientalists, that Islam would sort of dwindle or wither away and disappear in the 20th century. Books of people like Zwemer written in the early 20th century, in which it predicts that. But of course, the reverse took place not only for Islam, but for other religions. There's been a major revival of religious interest since the second half of the 20th century, and especially in Islam, and to some extent Hinduism and Buddhism and other religions, but especially Islam. And now you have it in Christian fundamentalism in the United States itself. But as far as the Islamic world is concerned, Islam was never truncated or eclipsed to need to be revived. What we need is to make its treasures better known in a contemporary language. Islam has to look upon the West from the point of view of Islam, and not to look upon itself from the point of view of the West. I've said this for decades. If a human being does that, they say he's mentally ill, has schizophrenia, and they take him to asylum. We cannot be taken to asylum as a civilization. In the same way that the West looks upon the Islamic world from its own point of view, we have to look upon the Western world from our point of view. And Dr. Osman Bakar and a few other scholars, some of whom I've had the pleasure of teaching myself, and others whom I've known in various ways, and some whom I do not know, but I've read their writings, are pioneers in what I've been preaching for and writing about for decades and decades. That is to provide an Islamic vision of global civilizations, especially Western civilizations, but from the Islamic point of view, not from the Western point of view. The day when we would take books from English and French and German about Islamic philosophy, translated into our local languages and teach it in our universities are over. We know how writing our own books more and more, not that it's completely done, but it's done to some extent. And we must come to understand these subjects from our own point of view. And one of the most important, which involves, in fact, the work of Dr. Bakar, is the question of science. Science is nonsense. Science is related to civilization. It's related to the worldview. When the West took over Islamic science in the Middle Ages, it did not adopt the Islamic worldview. It integrated Islamic sciences into the Christian worldview of its own. We have not been able to do that in reverse in the 19th and 20th century. And Dr. Bakar and others have been really pioneers in trying to present Islamic science and learning from the point of view of Islam and provide the means of looking at modern science from our own point of view. I've trained many, many students over these decades. Some of them are world famous philosophers, writers, teachers, and so forth. And I'm proud to say that Dr. Bakar is one of my best, and in this particular field has been really outstanding in pursuing in the Malay world an issue which is not bound to the Malay world alone, but which is a critical, vital issue to the whole of the Islamic world. I pray, Mr. Prime Minister, for your health, for that of your country, and for Dr. Bakar, and I hope that inshallah, under your guidance, scholars such as he will be appreciated while they're alive, and they will give courage to others to pursue the fields of scholarship and dedicate themselves to knowledge and the truth. Assalamu alaikum.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the time we are all waiting for. The inaugural speech in IIUM from our beloved 10th Prime Minister. Yang Amat Berhormat Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim, Prime Minister of Malaysia, will now deliver his speech and launch a book and forum entitled Knowledge, Tradition and Civilization, Essays in Honor of Professor Osman Bakar. Please welcome Yang Amat Berhormat Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. Alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil karim. Sudah yang kita raikan, saya panggil Osman, Profesor Emeritus Dato Osman Bakar, Menteri Pendidikan Tinggi Dato Seri Khalid Nordin, pengurusi lembaga, Presiden Universiti dan juga Rektor, Tuan-tuan yang terutama dan rakan-rakan yang saya muliakan. Hari ini kita hadir untuk memberi penghormatan tinggi kepada seorang sarjana ulung negara. Untuk mendapatkan Profesor Syed Hussein Nasser untuk memberi kata kesambutan. Itu dengan sendirinya satu penghormatan yang jauh lebih tinggi daripada apa yang upayakan. Karena apa yang saya sampaikan tidak upaya untuk mencapai kedudukan dan makam Syed Hussein Nasser, guru kami dan sarjana yang banyak memberi bimbingan, walaupun saya tidak secara rasminya menjadi pelajar beliau seperti mana Osman. Saya harap dengan peluncuran buku ini yang mengumpulkan pandangan para sarjana ulung, tidak termasuk saya. Pertamanya saya tidak termasuk dalam kategori sarjana ulung. Keduanya saya yang paling lambat menghantar manuskrip. Jadi kalau terlambat peluncuran ini, ialah di antara sebabnya ialah kelewatan saya menyiapkan manuskrip tersebut, kerana saya masa itu sibuk kempen ke hulu ke hilir. Now, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, and brothers and sisters, we are here to honor our great scholar. Of course, I'm a little biased because he's a dear brother, one of my closest associates for more than half a century, although we still remain relatively young. And Osman has been working indefatigably hard in this level of scholarship to give essence and meaning to what Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhu said, lazzatul ma'rifah. And even my personal experience with him, and he was at Temple University apartment, where he was at that time in awe of Al-Biruni. I can recall that I had to endure the torture after traveling all the way from Kuala Lumpur to Washington, D.C. and to Philadelphia. And after dinner prepared by Badaraya, I had to stay on for hours just to listen to Biruni's thesis on Hinduism. And that's Osman. His obsession for scholarship surpassed his humanitarian concern for a brother who's struggling to stay awake and alive. Now, I've read most of his works, not because of just my pure interest, but I'm compelled to do so. Because if I fail to do it, it would be a disservice to a great brother, great friend, of course, an important Malaysian scholar. And I hope now that the minister, my colleague, who has that passion and interest in scholarship and undertaking serious work in reforming institutions of higher education, will take into serious consideration his views and the advice of Professor Hussein Nasser to ensure that we are able to excel in our work and ensure that institutions, including IIUM, ISTAC, and universities in Malaysia, be seen to be centers of excellence in learning and scholarship. Now, Professor Osman is a polymath because he transcends compartmentalization. He has retained, as I said, lazzatul ma'rifah, that child's sense of wonder, leaving no question unasked. That's precisely the reason why I think he has migrated from mathematics to philosophy of science. At that time, the colleagues were a bit surprised because he was quite unique in his attempt to excel in mathematics per se, which is more than alien and Greek to me. So when he decided to pursue philosophy of science, we were a bit appalled until he explained the relationship between mathematics and philosophy, and having exposure to the great gurus in the Islamic world, Marhum Ismail Faruqi and Hussein Nasser at Philadelphia University. Now, he can discuss, Osman, at ease, Ibn Sina to Al-Ghazali, and I remember even a book on Darwin, on Charles Darwin, and Albert Einstein, while making staccato forays into the rare field world of Plato, Aristotle, and back to this region, Confucius. He was quite instrumental in the organization of this great conference that I initiated, Islam and Confucianism, many years back, bringing this intellectual and this great scholar, neo-Confucianist scholar, Professor Tu Wei Ming, who was then at Harvard and now at Beijing University. It is more pertinent here, relevant here, to organize a discussion on Islam and Confucianism, because in all our experience, it's always been Islam and Christianity, Islam and the West. So, and he has published, and incidentally, Tu Wei Ming made reference to this in his in the article he wrote in the book published and edited by Osman, that as a neo-Confucianist scholar, his understanding of Islam, the universal message of Islam, the core fundamental issues addressed by Islam and Confucianism is only after that exposure and experience in the attending that conference, Islam and Confucianism. Now, 25 years ago, unlike Osman, who was very prolific, I only mentioned the Asian Renaissance. I wrote that in the encounter between the civilizations of the East and the West, generations of intelligentsia from the East, the Muslims and the Hindus and the Confucianists, were caught in a predicament profound and far-reaching. Whether to remain faithful to one's traditions or to renounce them for a way of life perceived as superior. Lo and behold, indeed, Osman shows that you could well have the best of both worlds. And that is precisely because he has followed the footsteps of the great masters of learning and the erudition of the golden age of Islam. While Osman is of Asia and the Muslim world, his scholarship, as manifested in his voluminous intellectual output, transcends it, even as he draws inspiration, drinking from the wells of knowledge and wisdom from the likes of Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, and Al-Farabi. And we trace the long and winding road of Osman's civilizational quest for synthesis. One defining feature emerges. It's nothing less than a journey, than a Tawhidic-centric journey. The unity of all knowledge, philosophical and scientific, and based on values and ethics. For Osman, it is an odyssey that takes him from merely the specific concerns of the philosophy of science to a broader, more universal imperatives of civilizational crisis. Must societal reform precede civilizational renewal? Or is the latter the sine qua non for Islah and Tajdeed? This was the question I had to reflect before I crafted that Madani. Now, should we not first examine the readiness of the Ummah for the transformation to be effected? Are these mere academic questions, or do they provide the needed intellectual context for articulating the multidimensional character of reforms? Now, if I may state the proposition, intellectual inclusivity amidst an ocean of intellectual diversity and the art of synthesizing the multiplicity of worldviews. That is how I contextualize Professor Osman's works. By its very nature, it is an expanding, highly dynamic frame of incapable of compartmentalization, which I referred to earlier about Ortega y Gasset, the great Spanish philosopher, in his Revolt of the Masses, Rebellion de las Masas, where he referred to barbarism of specialization. You will not find it if you are back to fundamentals, the core of Islamic teachings, of Confucianist ethics. Then this notion of specialization, which has been the bulk of Western knowledge and science at present, will be addressed by this reference to universal understanding and the Madani concept. Osman has even revived the study of the Persian scholar Al-Biruni, which I have alluded to earlier, who engaged with Hinduism in the 11th century. And for Malaysia, it is so pertinent and relevant to understand why a great Muslim scholar interact and sat in front of Swamiji in the ashram just to learn about Hinduism, because he has to deal with the Hindus of India. Osman has ignited again the dialogue between Islam and Confucianism. Now, we are almost a quarter of the way into the century, and many have claimed this is to be the Asian century. But what does that actually mean? Well, I wouldn't be criticized if I suggest that I have the audacity to claim a small credit, but the due credit goes to Osman, because he made all the preparations, identified all the scholars, and got me to sign, like what Naqib Al-Attas did to me when he set up ISTAC. But all the same, we have seen that beginning, and I'm sure under this administration and Minister Khalid will pursue this issue, this policy or concept of civilizational dialogue, because it is so pertinent and relevant for the survival of Malaysia as a multi-ethnic and pluralistic country. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have great we have the honor to understand and appreciate more the contributions of a great scholar, and some of my concerns, my views, my appreciations have been expressed in this book, brilliantly edited by Professor Khairuddin. I must also commend him for this effort, and not to forget the initial contribution of our brother Yaqub Mirza. Now, I made reference to this article or forward that Osman actually was so involved with the activism and da'wah and education, even not within the confines of the academia. When I set up a school for dropouts for the poor in Kebun Baru, Yayasan under academic, we have this leading scholar going down there with great patience, dealing with his students, given a second chance to pass, to go through their examinations. And you must understand Osman in that context. Coming from a very poor family, but beautiful parents who had that sort of understanding and wisdom without any degree. You talk to them and enjoy the companionship, and they understand what we mean by values and ethics without mentioning the word values or ethics, or possibly not even have heard of the word ethics, but the understanding and the appreciation of these principles is legendary. As for education itself, and this is a challenge to our Minister Khalid, we would do well to recall Neil Postman's reminder to be wary of the false gods of modern education, or Harry Lewis' excellence without a soul. I have a colleague from the university who said, well, at least we have a soul. Harvard has excellence but no soul. We have soul but no excellence. I'm not too sure, frankly. I think with humility, and the rector is here, it is better to admit a little soul and a little excellence. What we need is excellence and soul. Thus, while imparting technical and vocational skills, inculcation of economic utility and the pursuit of sciences, as well as the humanities in higher education, are all crucial elements for the advancement of society and the production of a functional and productive workforce, we must never forget that the primary rationale for public education is character development, is values and ethics. So it is relevant, Osman, what you have suggested, and of course endorsed by the foremost Muslim philosopher, thinker of the world, that the teaching of Islamic civilization at all levels of education is long overdue, including a thorough review of the curriculum content of the subject of Islamic civilization. I now pass it to Minister Khalid to continue the effort. Now, I just digress a bit because our discourse cannot deny the fact that there's so much misunderstanding and prejudice, in fact, enmity against any word. First, religion, and more important, Islam. And the recent blatant disregard for values and ethics and humanity is the burning of the Quran in Sweden. What do you want to prove? That you are secular, you are against Islam, or you are against religion? But what you actually portray is the degradation of man and values. So I mentioned to the foreign minister recently to call the Swedish ambassador and convey our feeling of disgust towards the, not necessarily complicity, but the tolerance of this. We in Malaysia will not tolerate not only the burning of the Quran, the burning of the Bible or the Hindu text, because we value humanity. We respect the right of every person in advancing their own faith and values. And we cannot say this unfreedom. Freedom to exercise what is right. Not freedom to kill. Not freedom to dehumanize. Not freedom to degrade. And this is, I think, important. We have expressed in the strongest terms. Of course, President Tayyip Erdogan seems to take the lead in this, and I certainly support his expression of disgust and condemnation, because for no reason you provoke the sentiments of the Ummah, for no reason, while we are trying to portray, educate our message, because we have problems too. We have this effort of a few, even within our societies. There's a tendency to incite racial hatred or to promote religious bigotry. We have that in the name of Islam. We have to deal with it. This is an internal challenge that we have. But these attempts, the cartoon and now the burning of the Quran, is merely an attempt to provoke, cause discord, and barbaric, to use the word. And I would appeal, of course, to Ms. Messrs to continue their protests, to express their disgust, but also to accept it as a challenge. That we have then to honor our commitment. We protest the burning of the Quran. Yes, we must. But we must give our understanding and do our utmost to ensure that the message of the Quran is alive within us. So, terima kasih saudaraku Osman. Salam kepada Badariah yang tak dapat hadir. Saya ingat satu majlis yang sangat istimewa kerana sedikit keuzuran, dan kepada keluarga beliau dan kepada sahabat-sahabat yang menjayakan, termasuk Khairuddin dan pihak ISTAC dan UIA yang memberikan kerjasama. Saya ucapkan terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, moving on to the next agenda, the presentation of souvenir. Ladies and gentlemen, our heartiest appreciation to Yang Amat Berhormat, Datuk Seri Prime Minister, are books that symbolize ilmu or knowledge. It is stated in a quote that reading is a conversation. All books talk, but a good book listens as well. Thus, 3 books to accompany Datuk Seri from the university are, of course, the book launched today, Knowledge, Tradition and Civilization, essays in honor of Professor Osman Bakar, together with the other 2 books from the university, entitled Sejahtera Academic Framework, and another one, the newly launched Hikmah Toleransi, Falsafah Kepemurahan dan Keamanan. I now have the pleasure to invite Tan Sri President to present a token of appreciation to Yang Amat Berhormat Prime Minister. Thank you, sir. We are not finished yet, actually. We have another one. Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, Datuk Sri and the rest, please remain standing. We have another one. This is the one that we are waiting for, the gimmick for the book launching. Ladies and gentlemen, to mark the end of the ceremony, I would like now to call Yang Amat Berhormat Prime Minister to unveil a frame as a symbolic that the book is now ready for the public to read and benefit from. And in fact, we also have the counter for the book orders and selling outside the hall. Alhamdulillah, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our program this morning. On behalf of the organizer, I, Shahrizad binti Saidul Hajj, thank everyone for your presence and my apology for any shortcomings. Indeed, good things are from Allah. Wrongdoings are a weakness, and for that, we seek Allah's mercy to forgive us. Stay safe, everyone. Yang Amat Berhormat Datuk Seri, before we proceed for lunch, it is our pleasure to invite all of you on stage to the floor for a group photo with all guests. So photographers, please clear the floor for the group photo. You should be on stage for the photos. And all guests are invited to stand and get ready for photo shoot. Everyone must be in the frame. The UMC members of the university, please. Tan Sri. Thank you, Dato Sri, and invited guests will now usher to the banquet hall for lunch. And participants, this is an announcement to all the participants. Actually, this is the announcement from the publisher. The books will be available. The books will be available outside of the hall with a special price. Paperback RM89 and hardback RM189. This offer is only valid for this day. Please grab it while stock lasts. Thank you. And all participants, please proceed to the designated hall at the lower ground level for your lunch. Yeah. So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. of Islam in Southeast Asia in production stage. This is in the pipeline with Oxford University Press in 2022. He is currently writing his new book entitled Sufism in Southeast Asia, a biography, in London, One World publication, inshallah. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the floor Professor Syed Khairuddin Al-Junaid.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Can you hear me? It's clear. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wassalatu wassalamu ala syarafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. I would like to thank everyone for being here today. It is indeed an honor for all of us here as contributors and also students as well as colleagues of Professor Osman Bakar to be here in this forum to discuss an essays in honor of Professor Osman Bakar, as we have heard in the earlier session that was opened by our dear Prime Minister Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim. The book is a culmination of not only the essays that are in it, but also a culmination of the lifetime works of Professor Osman Bakar. And indeed, if I can somehow recap or reiterate what Professor Osman Bakar mentioned just now in his own speech, I was somehow invited to edit this book. I felt really very small to do a humongous task such as this, but decided to accept the project because myself and I'm sure many others who are present here today regard Professor Osman Bakar not only as a scholar of Islam and the Islamic civilization, but also as a teacher and more importantly as our friend in our efforts to deepen our knowledge about Islam and the Islamic societies. So I want to begin first by talking about the book itself and how and why did I decide to edit it in such a manner. Now the whole book that I hope everyone here has bought and hope that you will buy also for your friends and colleagues is organized around two key themes that explain the entire career of Professor Osman Bakar. The first theme is on the production and the problem of knowledge in Islam. Why I call it the production and the problem of knowledge in Islam? Professor Osman Bakar's works have always been concerned with how Muslim thinkers in the past produce knowledge and reproduce knowledge. Muslim thinkers in the past were not only consumers of knowledge that came from many traditions, be it the Greek tradition, the Indian tradition, or whatever tradition there was that was exposed to the Muslim world then. They were also people who recreate the knowledge that they have gotten. So that happened in the history of Islam that has been very much documented by Muslim and non-Muslim scholars, one of which is Franz Rosenthal in his very famous book, Knowledge Triumphant. He explained how Muslim scholars in the past, because of their love of the Quran and seeing the Quran as light, decided to produce new knowledge that they have gotten from other civilizations. And that gave birth to a civilization of books. And that is the title of my next book actually, The Civilization of Books. That if we want to understand the civilization of Islam through how Professor Osman Bakar has explained it to us, it is a civilization that was filled with books. And not only filled with books, but filled with these debates over the value of books, over the importance of books, and over the classification and hierarchies of knowledge in Islam and in understanding societies. But in Muslims encountering different kinds of knowledges, they also had problems with this knowledge. So the coming of colonialism, as Professor Osman Bakar has shown in a recently edited book, has affected the manner to which Muslims understood the knowledge that they have gotten from their predecessors. From the idea of knowledge as something that manifests the unity of creation and the unity of divine, knowledge in the Islamic civilization suffered from secularization and the dichotomization between what is profane and what is sacred, between the worldly and the non-worldly. Hence, the crisis that we have today in the Muslim world, which Professor Osman Bakar has documented, and the essays in the first part of the book has clearly shown. So that's the first idea or theme that the book is trying to emphasize. And as you read the essays in the first part of the book, you will see the intellectual biography of Professor Osman Bakar unfolding in many of the essays. And my own introduction try to explain that. The second issue that this edited book is concerned with is the issue of civilizational unity and renewal. And Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim just now was talking about that. It is not enough for us to philosophize the problem of knowledge in the past and in our time. And indeed, one of the major crises that have affected Muslims for more than 200 years is the fact that Muslims are good theorizers, philosophers, and master complainers. And Professor Osman Bakar is very much attentive to this issue because he is concerned with the fact that Muslims are very good in coming out with ideas, but not very good in solving the very problems that are in front of their eyes. Hence, he talks about the issue of civilizational renewal. Why you need to renew civilization? Because the problems that we are faced with is not a Malaysian problem, it's not a Singaporean problem, it's not a Southeast Asian problem, and more importantly, because I feel strongly for it, it's not an Arab problem. Because, of course, Arabs are full of problems. But it is a problem that affects us all as 1.2 billion people all over the world. We are a civilization that was once triumphant, that was once dominant, but we became a civilization that accept rather than produce, that became consumers rather than producers. And Professor Osman Bakar was very much concerned with how this civilization can renew itself. Now this renewal, back in the 1970s, came with this idea that Muslims had solutions that they think is unique in their own traditions and experience. And Professor Osman Bakar is arguing that this is not the case. The only way for any civilization to be renewed in totality and in an expansive and comprehensive way is for the civilization to see lines of unity, similarities, parallels with other civilizations. And this is where Professor Osman Bakar talks about the Tawhidic worldview. So the essays in the second part of the book emphasizes on this. How can civilization work together? How can civilizations come together to reconceptualize the problems of our time? And in one of Professor Osman Bakar's books, he talks about the problem of environmental degradation that we see around us, that we need not look too far. And I always tell friends all over Southeast Asia, whenever I travel, if you cannot see that we are in a civilizational crisis, just see the state of the toilets in Muslim universities. It sounds very basic, but if you cannot clean the dirtiest place in your institution, you cannot get your civilization right. And the second part of the essay engages with how different thinkers of the Islamic civilization, different traditions, and this is where we have people like Dr. Peter Chang, talks about the meaning of civilization and how this is parallel with the Islamic civilization. So we have contributions from people who are looking at Persian thinkers, in as much as we have contributions on people who are looking at Cheng He, contributions from people who are looking at Korean Muslims, and so forth and so forth. So this is the architecture of the book, and I hope that when we read the edited book, it will inspire more students, more thinkers, and even policymakers, and anyone interested in the issues of knowledge and civilization as well as tradition to engage more with Professor Osman's ideas. Now, because of this, it is not excessive to say, as Professor John Esposito has said, that Professor Osman Bakar is one of the leading Muslim scholars of the late 20th and 21st century. Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim was not far off the mark when he said in his own contribution that Professor Osman Bakar is a polymath, a towering figure, a noted exemplar, and a beacon for all to build bridges with others in thought and in society. Hence, this forum. We have today 4 speakers with us, 4 esteemed speakers with us, who will engage with the volume, more importantly, but also with Professor Osman Bakar as a persona in the Muslim world. We have Professor Rosnani Hashim. We have also Dr. Peter Chang, Professor Zaid Ahmad, and Mr. Yusmadi Yusof. The selection of this forum is not accidental. We didn't call them because they are around or they are in KL, but we have gotten them here because 2 of them represent persons who have contributed to the volume, and Professor Zaid is himself an expert on the Islamic civilization, and Mr. Yusmadi is someone that is known in the community as an activist who initiates social change on the ground. So I would like to begin first with our esteemed professor, Professor Rosnani Hashim. If I can introduce her, she is a known expert on education in Islam. Interestingly, I read his book, I read her book when I was an undergrad on educational dualism in Islam. And I was always wondering when I read the book, like, who is this lady? What is she doing? She was formerly the Dean and Professor of Social Foundations of Education at the Kuliah of Education, International Islamic University of Malaysia. She obtained her PhD from the University of Florida, and her expertise are on Islamic education, mathematics education, and pedagogy of philosophical inquiry. Professor Rosnani Hashim is a very humble person. When I first met her, I was pretty shocked that someone who's so humble wrote such a very powerful book on the problems of education in the Muslim world. She has had fellowships in Japan, in the Middle East, in the US, and she was also instrumental in editing a number of journals with IIUM. As mentioned, her well-known books are Educational Dualism in Malaysia, Towards an Islamic Curriculum, that is published by IIUM, History, Theory and Practice of Philosophy for Children, that is published by Routledge, and many other books that engages with the issues of education and change in society. So I would like to hand over to Professor Rosnani Hashim. Yeah.
This is, oops, it's a different slide, tak ada slide. The one I gave tu tak ada. Oh, there, okay, this one. Okay. Hold on, Apa dia tunjuk? Okay, thank you. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin, wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wa mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. My dear brother Khairuddin, fellow panels, speakers, my senior brothers and sisters up front here, and fellow students as well, and all of you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good day. Okay, I'm really honored to be invited to present my ideas about our great Professor Osman, whom, although I did not sit at his feet, I regard as also one of my teachers. I have many great teachers that I've learned through their writings, so he's one of them. And I don't think we have all heard how he dedicated he is in terms of his ideas, works, and services, and how he has been listed in the 500 most influential Muslims in the world for a series of years, okay? And he has written a lot on Islamic philosophy, especially epistemology, philosophy of science, comparative religion, inter-civilizational dialogues, and Islam in general. He's a scholar come activist. I mean, if you study his life, who integrates theory with practice, iman and amal, okay? So this perspective is very appropriate, comes at the right time, I think. I feel honored because I was invited, first of all, to write a chapter in the book, and now out of the 20 or so writers, I was invited to present something about the perspective to you all. So it is really a great pleasure. Okay. Now, I did not know Professor Osman until in the 80s as a member of IIUM, where I realized that Prof. Osman was already chairing the Education Bureau of IIUM, and also in founding the Institute of Islamic Studies or Institute Pengajian Islam, Ilmu Islam, which is now College Darul Hikmah, and also the president of Asasi, Angkatan Sains Islam. We have Prof. Mukhtar, Prof. Tunku Azman here, okay. Formerly also very strong holder for the Asasi and the journal. So I read his articles in Risalah, in Kasturi, in Journal Pendidikan Islam, and I heard of him as a VC of University of Malaya and the Dean of the Faculty of Science when he established also the Center for Civilizational Dialogue. So I followed him, that's how I knew him. It was only as a PhD student when I was writing the book that Prof. Khairuddin mentioned just now, Islam, Educational Dualism in Malaysia, which involves looking at education, which means looking at epistemology, knowledge, looking at man, okay, looking at values, okay. Then I began to read his work seriously, and the most important work was his classification of knowledge. I think classification of knowledge, Al-Farabi, and also Tawhidic sciences. So I really used that as a very strong textbook, okay, in also developing my own thoughts, because it was one of the books that spurred me into, beside the book by Syed Hussein Nas himself, Traditional Education in Islam, the start of reviving philosophy in the Muslim world, especially in Muslim education. We know that these ideas came about in the Islah movement of Jamaluddin Afghani. Was one of the first one after he debated with Enes Renan. And then I was reading further and I knew that the contemporary scholars were Syed Hussein Nas and his student Osman Bakar. So that I picked up from them. Okay. Now, of course, later I was invited as speakers in IAIS, okay, when Prof. Osman was the CEO, and UBD when he was the head there at the center, so ASIS, okay. And also I invited him for our FPK seminar. Now, turn. Oh, okay. So, in this short time, I will just focus a little bit on the background, the Muslim educational crisis and reform, Prof. Osman diagnosis of the Muslim crisis, his thoughts on universal and modern science, and also Islamic science, which is the next one, which is religious consciousness and the scientific spirit in Islamic tradition, and resolving the Ummatic crisis. And I will have a short discussion. I think we all know what Islamic civilization is knowledge-based, with the Quran and the Sunnah as the major sources, and also creation is the kawniyah, the science of God. And from this we derive the Naqli and Aqli science, which shows a unity of purpose. The purpose is to believe in one God. So all this knowledge, despite their different categorization, is meant to show the belief in the unity of God. And early Muslims were well versed in both knowledge and its unity. They did not separate knowledge from the sacred. However, there is a decline in Muslim science when religious science was prioritized over the acquired science. This happens after, I think, the conflict or what they call this, the debates during the time of Al-Ghazali and the Mu'tazila and so on. So religious science was prioritized over the acquired science, which means there is a disequilibrium in the Muslim tradition of knowledge. Okay, so by the 14th century, we have decline. Although we would say that Al-Ghazali produced his Tahafut al-Falasifa, trying to show the problem with the philosopher, and then the conversation continued with Ibn Rushd, who wrote Tahafut at-Tahafut, which is a good tradition. This is a good tradition of Islamic civilization. When you don't agree with someone, you don't just make noise. You write to show what's wrong with the person's thesis. However, by the time you have read, when you wrote that, the person who originated the thesis has already passed away. So he's not there to defend himself. Same thing with what happened was that Ibn Rushd wrote this Tahafut at-Tahafut, the incoherence of the incoherence. Okay, and then he also wrote Fasal al-Makal to show that there is unity between faith and reason. Okay, of course, when Al-Ghazali wrote the Tahafut at-Tahafut, Tahafut al-Falasifa, Ibn Sina al-Farabi were already there. So I said that they debated, but they debated in writing. So this is a very good tradition to follow among the Islamic civilization. They don't just make noise, they write to show what's wrong with the point. And then you have Ibn Tufayl writing, Hi Ibn Yaqzan. It is a story, but that story has a big message behind it to show that you can know the unity of God, the one God, through either the empirical science or through the religious science. Okay. And then, of course, we have the fall of Baghdad and then the decline. Okay. So this Muslim educational crisis and attempted reform happened when the Muslim lands were colonized. There shouldn't be an arrow from the First World Conference of the Muslim land. Okay, sorry about that. So when they were colonized, you have the dualistic education system, and many attempts were made to reform or to do Islam. Okay. You have in the 18th century, as I said just now, Afghani and Abdu. Although Abdu and Afghani took a political stand, while Abdu took it through education and the integrated curriculum. And Abdu had many students from Southeast Asia, from Malaysia and also Indonesia, and they attempted to transplant this in our country. Okay. So you have Syed Sheikh Al-Hadi, you have Muhammad Yunus, Imam Zakarshi, and so on. Okay. And the major thing that happened in this century, 20th century, was the First World Conference on Muslim Education, 1977. This is a watershed in Muslim education. And this is where new ideas were thrown out that led to many actions after that. Among them is the formulation of the Islamic philosophy of education, the need for Islamization of knowledge, the establishment of Islamic schools and universities, the revision of the curriculum of Muslim education, establishment of IIIT, establishment of ISTAC, Islamic Academy of Cambridge, Muslim Education Quarterly, and many more. So that is, although there were subsequent conferences after that, but this is the most significant one because it achieves many things. Okay? And it was during this conference that we have three giants, and these giants, I would say that Prof. Osman sat at the feet of this giant and later sat on their shoulder, I think, okay, on the shoulder of this giant. And now he is carrying the banner for the next generation. So of course, in between, he tried to make some changes or combine some of the ideas. For example, you notice that Al-Atas lists down this as the problems of the Muslim Ummah. Al-Faruqi noted that, and then Sa'ud Hussein Nas noted one thing. But the main thing is that Al-Atas and Faruqi has secularism as the cause of the problem. And then loss of adab and erroneous leaders that leads to more confusion. So our political leader, the leaders, gave more confusion in society to the Muslim. Whereas Al-Faruqi focused on educational dualism and the loss of the Islamic vision and crisis of the Ummatic identity. So we have lost our identity. We don't know who we are already because of this colonization. And Sa'ud Hussein Nas, his main idea is welcome Yang Berhormat Mazli, Mazli, my colleague. And the loss of sacredness in modern science. This is the spiritual, the soul of science has been lost. So this is the major three giants, and they, I think, have influenced Professor Osman a lot. And it is rare for us to sit at the feet of three giants, not only one giant, three giants, okay? Stand on their shoulders. I don't know whether Prof. Osman were aware of another giant. Maybe he was in a different stream, Fazlur Rahman. Because I've never read in his work anything to do with Fazlur Rahman. But Fazlur Rahman is another giant. But of course, they were opposing giant to Al-Atas and Faruqi in terms of Islamization of knowledge, as you can see. Okay? But of course, this is a very rare feat. How many of you sat on giants? The feet of giants. Maybe you will not realize you were sitting on the feet of giant until maybe 10 years or 20 years later when the giant shows up. Okay? But for Prof. Osman, I think it's a rare feat to sit at the feet of three giants, three intellectual giants in the Muslim civilization. Okay? And of course, the giants have their resolution. And then you can see where the Prof. Osman took some of this. Okay? Al-Atas, his main aim is produce the good man. And how? Through the Islamic worldview, which provide the intellectual foundation. And that was implemented practically here in ISTAC. And if you look at the curriculum, you have philosophy, Western philosophy, Islamic philosophy, civilization. So you can see the Islamic worldview is the core. Okay? And if you look at Al-Faruqi, he was more interested in critical analysis and synthesis of the two types of knowledge, the modern and the traditional, and goes with the Islamization of knowledge, with the principle of unity, yes, unity of truth, unity of knowledge, unity of prophet, unity of mankind, and so on, principles of unity. Okay? Of course, you can see that the ultimate thing for him is to produce the Islamic textbook. We cannot be simply talking about Islamization of knowledge, and then we still use the Western textbook. And in that sense, when I was appointed for a short while to become the director for IIIT in Southeast Asia, in Asia, I told them I'm not going to organize any conferences because we have been talking a lot. What I want is we want to focus on writing textbooks or writing books, and IIIT has to support that. Well, I didn't last very long, okay, but my successor, I mean, I came after Prof. Osman then was the director, okay, and then my successor, Dr. Jamil Osman, alhamdulillah, managed to bring that to reality. So now we have IIIT producing a lot of textbooks, supporting textbooks. So I think that is good because we don't have to, I think somebody mentioned this morning, you cannot just, Prof. Syed Hussein Nas, you cannot take the West. You have to bring Islam to the West, okay? So this is Al-Faruqi's how-to. And then we have Syed Hussein Nas. Syed Hussein Nas is the one who championed the revitalization of Islamic and philosophical sciences. And he called for the teaching of philosophy in Muslim higher education institutions. He said that this is wajib. I remember reading traditional Islam in traditional education, traditional, can't remember the title book now. But it is wajib. But of course you have to have your background, Islamic background first, okay? So now, where does Prof. Osman stand? After standing on this giant, so this is Prof. Osman's, I hope I'm correct, okay? Reading him, his diagnosis of the crisis. He said that if you look, he agrees with Al-Atas and Al-Faruqi on IOK, although there was an attempt to say IOCK, okay, to differentiate it, because Al-Faruqi does not differentiate the contemporary and the traditional. Even the traditional has to be criticized. Okay, that's how we differ from Al-Atas. Okay, anyway, he agrees with them on IOK, but he was more influenced by Nasir in his advocacy for the revitalization of Islamic science. He argues that the Muslim Ummah was faced with a knowledge and identity crisis. Two things: knowledge crisis, identity crisis. And in that sense, it's a bit more like Al-Faruqi. Okay? The Tawhidic vision of knowledge for him is all true human knowledge ought to be ultimately related to Islamic intellectual culture. You cannot separate knowledge from the Tawhidic dimension. Okay? And only a sound epistemological order exemplified in Tawhidic epistemology may guarantee a healthy thinking and knowledge culture. A renewal of Tawhidic epistemology is much needed. So that's why it called for renewal, like what Prof. Khairuddin mentioned just now. But that needs a sound epistemological order, okay? So then he looked at the universal and or traditional and modern science, okay? And this is very important because science, why do we have science, okay? Science was used in Islamic tradition to reaffirm the perennial truth. It's not the other way around. Science was used to reaffirm the perennial truth. Modern science is built on the assumption and conclusion that expunge religious and philosophical influences. So modern science throw away the soul. The myth, there is a myth to say that there's neutrality of science in relation to cultural values. Both scientific and technological developments are influenced by beliefs. Classifying the sciences within a hierarchy of knowledge while at the same time developing and creating new knowledge. This is what the Muslims have been doing. In fact, Al-Farabi was known as the second teacher. He was the second person after Aristotle to do classification of sciences. And this is where we have to see. I took a long time to ponder at his classification, compared it to Al-Ghazali's classification, which is by duality. Fardu Ain, Fardu Kifayah, Akli, Nakli, Ulum Syariah, Ulum Nakliyah. And that's what we are with today. But if you look at Al-Farabi, it's linear. He started with the prerequisite for every, and then what's after that? Or what's the prerequisite for that? He begins with language, and then logic, and then mathematics, and then science, and you go higher and higher. I mean, he looks at the way knowledge and human civilization develop. So this is something that we have not really studied. Okay, we have studied, we have adopted Al-Ghazali's. Okay, but anyway, when they do that, they also want to branch out into new sciences. So that's why we have many branches after that, okay? And science is done not for the betterment of life and understanding of the world. It is useful in the quest for the perfection of the soul, which is the necessary condition for happiness in this world and in the life hereafter. So this is what I've gathered from Prof. Osman. But the main thing is, why do science? Why do science from the Islamic perspective, okay? I state here, the scientific spirit in Islam was first demonstrated in the religious science. In other words, it is the religious science and the demand of religious science that make it necessary for us to have the scientific discipline. Why? Because in the beginning, the passion for truth and objectivity, the general respect for fully corroborated empirical evidence, a mind skill in the classification of things, these are necessary in the study of hadith, Quran, and so on. A love for definitions and conceptual or semantic analysis, with great emphasis on logical clarity and precision, was also very much in the evidence in the tafsir of Quran. Logic was never conceived as being opposed to religious faith, but rather an indispensable tool of scientific thinking. The Muslim philosophers and scientists viewed logic a form of hikmah, a form of knowledge which is extolled by the Quran. Al-Ghazali, although he attacked the philosophers, he never abandoned logic. This is something that you must have. Okay? In his, he said, Al-Mizan in the Quran is translated as the balance, refers to logic, which is the balance in which man weighs ideas and opinions to arrive at correct measurement or judgment. While science in the West was inspired by skepticism in religion, at least in part, Islamic science was inspired by religion. So that is the difference, a major difference you can see from Prof. Osman's work. Okay? Tawheed is the source of the scientific spirit in all domains of knowledge. The idea of objectivity is inseparable from religious consciousness and spirituality. So you can see the difference. The difference is that religion was the one that spurred the growth of scientific activities. But the West, they throw out the religion, the soul. So that is very, very contradictory, isn't it? So to resolve the ummatic crisis, there's a tajdeed. What Prof. Osman has been saying, as I gathered from his work, is that more studies need to be done on epistemological roots of the Ummah knowledge crisis. That's why I said just now, we have to read. We have to do the classification of knowledge again. There are many. There is classification by Ibn Sina, Al-Farabi, Ikhwan al-Safa, Ibn Khaldun. Why did they have difference? And which is suitable for our time? Okay? And then existing research centers and groups on this particular aspect need to be further strengthened. The Tawhidic epistemology need to be made better known, repackaged. That's what just now even Prof. Hussein Nars was saying. We need to repackage it in the terminology of the West so that they understand it. Okay? And there should be more teaching and research program on epistemology, and Islam's knowledge and thinking culture needs to be better understood and cultivated. And for that, we can see that he has done a lot to translate it to practice through what he has been doing all this while. Okay? And the last, I think, he initiated. So among the courses that he initiated, Prof. Osman initiated, were courses on philosophy and history of science, logic, and religion. Also religion, philosophy of religion. Offer course on the philosophy of the discipline, philosophy of education, philosophy of science, philosophy of religion, philosophy of technology, and so on. Okay? A course on science and religion was introduced in the Islamic Studies Academy, IUM. So in IUM, the Academy Pengajian Islam introduced science and religion, philosophical sciences in other universities in the country abroad, and the creation of the TITAS course on Asian civilization and also ethics. Okay, the latest I'll postpone that since Yang Berhormat is here also. Okay, and then these are some of the courses that Prof. Osman has initiated in various universities in Malaysia and overseas, in Brunei and over Georgetown and other places as well. Okay, so for discussion, we noticed that it's similar to Alatas with IOK, closer to Al-Faruqi in the diagnose the crisis of the Ummah stemming from a knowledge problem and ummatic identity, transforming the minds of undergraduates and graduate students in the natural and applied sciences to having a holistic and Islamic view of their fields. In this sense, it continues the intellectual tradition of NAS. In fact, Al-Faruqi was concerned with the scholars. Prof. Osman is concerned with the students. That is another difference you can notice, okay? And Muslims have failed to Muslims have failed to present a lasting solution to the crisis because they do not have in their hands a total Islamic epistemology. The importance of logic to sharpen the mind has risen now, especially. So TITAS, the one that has been offered all this while, under the leadership of Yang Berhormat Dato, Dr. Mazli, not Dato, Dr. Mazli, Dr. Mazli, change 2 of that courses, Asian civilization, I think, to falsafah isu semasa. But the ethics remain the same. That is the ethics course. And I think the idea is to transform philosophy for transforming, not as history to be read and to know for information. No. The idea is philosophy, issue semasa is they can use logic, they can use to think, use it as a tool, philosophical tools to analyze the current contemporary problems. So that I think is a good step. I think Prof. Osman was also in that committee beside the rector of IUM and small others, small prawns like me, okay? So whatever. So I think that is a good move. But unfortunately, okay, the issue of instructors. If you make it a core course for all students, who will teach? Do they have philosophical background? Will they teach it like just history of philosophy? So this is the problem that I foresee, okay? And also Prof. Osman introduced philosophy of education and philosophy of science to the Bachelor of Science Education student in University of Malaya. And I think this is a plus. Because if you want to change the student, the teachers are the ones who should know first. But in IIUM, even the Bachelor of Islamic Studies have no philosophy of science. So I think UM is a bit ahead. Now, with regards to the, so I think we should be grateful to Yang Berhormat Mazli is here just, with us, because I do appreciate what he has done. Also, I think in line with the spirit of what Prof. Osman is trying to do to revive philosophical inquiry and Islamic spirit, scientific spirit in the higher education. So finally, conclusion, the problem has been diagnosed. We need to revitalize the discourse on Islamic intellectual sciences to recover its soul. We have to develop programs and courses in higher education and history and philosophy of each discipline. No institution, however, Prof. Osman have not established any institution like Al-Atas and Al-Faruqi, like his teacher, Prof. Hussein Nas. And that's where I thought that if there's no dedicated department dealing with philosophy, how can we get that instructors? So that in Malaysia, we still don't have a philosophy department. We used to have it in IIUM, but then they merged it with the faculty Usuluddin, Department Usuluddin. So the only place that we have it at ISTAC, but unfortunately ISTAC is only for graduate students, when we should be exposing it lower still. So this is the question that I have. And we don't want teaching history of philosophy instead of doing of philosophy. I think those are 2 different activities. We want the doing of philosophy. And that's why I have been working on that as my project in the past and also now. I call it the Hikmah Pedagogy of Philosophical Inquiry. I think we have to continue what Prof. Osman has been doing, and that is my way of continuing it. Thank you, brother. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for Professor Rosnani Hashim. If I can expand on what Professor Rosnani had said just now, if Prof. Hussein Nasir is concerned with scholars, Prof. Osman is concerned with students, but more than that, Prof. Osman has always been concerned with merging or bringing together different civilizational traditions where students and scholars are located. And this is why we need to hear from Dr. Peter Chang, who's currently based in the Institute of China Studies. And one may wonder why someone from China Studies is at all interested in Prof. Osman. So we will hear from him. He is currently in the University of Malaya. He is trained also in comparative philosophy and religion, which Professor Rosnani Hashim has mentioned, and also another essay in the volume by Professor Saleh Yapar talking about the crisis of humanities, basically, in an age of STEM education. Dr. Chang is very much interested in discourses over Confucianism, and he has been analyzing the opportunities and risks associated with the Belt and Road Initiative. Professor Chang is very concerned with the rise of Chinese soft power and how we, as part of the Muslim civilization, could also make sense of it. Being a Malaysian himself, his publications have been published not only locally but internationally, and he is very much sought after by some international media platforms such as the South China Morning Post. So let's listen to Professor Dr. Peter Chang and his perspectives on Professor Osman Bakar and also on Chinese philosophy.
Thank you very much, Professor Junid. Thank you for the privilege. Just want to recognize Professor Osman Bakar. Thank you for the honor to contribute to the fest trip and today's conversation. And friends and colleagues, good afternoon to you. In the interest of time, I will go straight into my presentation. How do I put it on? It's this one. Oh, I just share it, right? Okay, got it. Oh, yeah. All right, we got it there. I've titled my presentation today just as I titled the chapter that I contributed, Bridging Civilizational Divides, Osman Bakar's Lifelong Quest for the Middle Ground. I'm going to break my presentation into three main parts. My chapter itself has 5 parts, but because I've got limited time, so I have to skip a little bit. So the first part will be just a very quick overview of the first half of the chapter, and then I will have a little bit more time on the last 2 parts of the chapter, which I call In Search of the Middle Ground and the Malaysian lesson to meet halfway. Okay, let's do the overview. The overview of Professor Osman Bakar's lifelong quest for the middle pathway in terms of civilizational dialogue has been shaped through his writings, from my understanding, is by the 9/11 tragedy, the Clash of Civilization thesis that came out about that same time. And Professor Osman Bakar was consumed, as with all of us, was shocked by the tragedy, was saddened by the tragedy. But Professor Osman Bakar asked us to take a few steps back in order to recover from this clash of civilization. We really need to have self-introspection. Surely there is enough blame to go for everyone. No civilization is clean, has come to this aftermath with clean hands. All of us has inflicted harm one way or the other upon each other or upon ourselves. So there's this call. Of course, there are responsibilities to be borne, but each of us also needs to look inside. The self-introspection perspective I picked up from Professor Osman's writings is very pronounced. If we want to change the world, it has to change from within. And the challenge that is within us, Professor Osman Bakar writing, is that to actualize our own ideals. Sometimes we fail because all of us has filled our own respective religious tradition, civilizational tradition, communal ideals. We have failed ourselves oftentimes. And because of our failure, we also fail others. And that leads to that kind of a clash that we see happening And so there is these two steps I sense from Professor Osman's writing, that there's the need for introspection and then to strive for our own ideals. And one of the ideals that I picked up from Prof. Osman is beyond tolerance. When we come to the quest for harmonious coexistence between civilization, we should go one step more beyond just tolerating one another. We should really open up, learn from each other. We should really open up to be vulnerable and to be changed by the other. And this is in the context of Professor Osman Bakar's work on Confucianism itself, which in the morning the Prime Minister has alluded to, where he has played such a critical role in starting this dialogue, civilizational dialogue here in Kuala Lumpur. And Professor Tu Weiming, a renowned Confucian scholar at Harvard, was here and was moved. By then, at the time, Professor Tu Weiming's work was mainly between East and West, Confucianism and the West. There was no Islamic angle to his work at all. But it was through his experience in Malaysia that he brought it back to Boston and had this widening of horizon in terms of civilizational dialogue. And I happened to be there at that time, not long after he returned from Malaysia. When I did my doctorate studies at Harvard, Professor Tu Weiming told me, and when he found out that I'm from Malaysia, he said that you got to read Professor Osman Bakar's book. And that introduced also my own interest in the Islamic angle as well. So in a nutshell, Professor Osman Bakar, in terms of the civilizational struggles that we have, the clashes that we had, we need to look inside, to look into our better selves, to recover our ideals and work towards that. But that process itself is very difficult. Professor Osman Bakar struggles with that, how to achieve that ideal. And the ideal is played out in the search for the middle ground, the polarity, the tension between unity and diversity, the tension between the universal and the particularity. And then as a man of science, as a mathematician, Professor Osman Bakar is very attuned to the scientific revolution that is all around us. And yet, at the same time, as a man of faith, he's deeply aware of the limitations of science and reasons. Science and reasons need to be guided as well by the wisdom of the past, the spirituality of our traditions. So these are the two kind of tension that Professor Osman Bakar struggles with, trying to search for the middle ground. Let me go first to the first one. Unity and diversity, universal and particularity, and roots and branches. This tension between embracing the other and yet affirming oneself is very critical, as the Prime Minister earlier alluded to. When we encounter the West, do we learn from the West? Of course. Do we give up ourselves? No. Why don't we have the best of both worlds, as Professor Osman said? We learn from the West, and we retain the best that is on us. But that requires a lot of dialectical sort of analysis, how to balance the two. You know, even as we want to embrace change, we want to be anchored in our own heritage, in our own roots. And I like the way in which Professor Osman Bakar phrased it. This is his own words, quote, "While the external forces, including those coming from the West, can inspire and even shape reform in Muslim societies, ultimately what proves to be decisive in determining the lasting efficacy of these reforms will be the factor of their compatibility with Islamic teaching. This means that, for example, democratic reforms and the cultivation of democratic values in Muslim societies have to be sustained and nourished by their Islamic roots. Although their external forms may be borrowed from modern Western democratic traditions. I like the agricultural metaphor of the roots. Even as we grow, we must not forget our roots, our heritage. And that is the challenge that we have in a globalized village that is very diverse, and we have to be able to hold that tension in order, embracing the other, yet retaining our unique identity. And it's not always very easy. The other second challenge that we have is the science and faith. And I like Professor Osman Bakar really struggles with the challenges that modernity faces. If you listen to some of his lectures and his writings and his recent lectures as well, the ecological disaster that we are facing, there are so much potential and good that science has given to us, but there is so much that is lacking as well. Let's hear what Professor Osman has to say in his own words. Contemporary human civilization is rich and advanced in scientific and technical knowledge, but poor and backwards in moral and spiritual knowledge and wisdom. Consequently, we are superb at solving even the most complex of scientific and technological problems, and extremely successful in controlling the forces of the natural world that is external to us, but we are utterly hopeless when it comes to solving the most basic of human problems. And we fail miserably in the task of social engineering, that is in ordering and controlling human behaviors and the inner forces of human nature which governs us. There is certain thing that is almost yet unchanged, sort of perennial. That is the human spiritual vacuum. Even as our external form changes, even as we move into virtual reality, I've listened to Professor Osman Bakar pondering about artificial intelligence and the third dimension that we are in. These are things that will revolutionize our reality, but yet there are certain things that we struggle with. It's still constant. Egoism, that kind of thing, will still remain the same. Now, Tip O'Neill, the famous US former Speaker of the House, once says that politics is local, and I think philosophy and theology is also very local. And we are shaped by where we are. We grew up, where we are from. It is our context that eventually shapes us. And so it goes with Professor Osman Bakar, where he is uniquely not only an Islamic scholar, but also a uniquely Malaysian scholar. And Malaysia has some story to tell us, I think. Islam with Malay characteristics, I'm borrowing the Chinese term. The Chinese likes to phrase it capitalism with Chinese characteristics or socialism with Chinese characteristics. And I think here in this context, Islam with Malay characteristics, and then Malaysia and an inclusive ummah. The Malay characteristics makes Malaysia an inclusive ummah. And let me explain by what I mean, and also drawing on Professor Osman's work. First of all, Islam and Malay characteristics, conversions and synthesis, Adat and Sharia. We were talking that we have to encounter the new, embrace the new, and yet retain the old, but it has always been quite difficult, and this is how Professor Osman Bakar phrased it. Not all Adat are admissible, and strain persists between the old and the new. Still, over time, and through the ethnic genius of the Malays and the spiritual genius of Islam, these two living entities managed to forge a Malay Islamic identity that clearly distinguishes it from both the pre-Islamic Malay civilizational identity and other branches of the global Islamic civilization. So what we are seeing right now is really a living sort of entity, the Malay Islamic civilization with its very distinct characteristics. Let me read from the text here. Indeed, Islam in Malaysia is imbued with distinctive Malay characteristics. Among other virtues, the Malay communal ethos and the spirit of forbearance is credited for engendering a more inclusive Islamic Ummah. And one historic expression of this was at the birth of Malaysia, when the Malay majority accepted non-Malay minorities as part of the newly independent country. And I picked it up from an essay that Professor Osman Bakar asked me to review and give a response with. And I really like the way in which Professor Osman Bakar described and articulated the unique experience that Malaysia had at the beginning of the founding of our country. It says, this is what Professor Osman Bakar wrote. Notwithstanding the shortcomings as an ethnic and religious community, it is still worth noting that just over 60 years ago, the Malays set a historical precedent in modern times when they collectively agreed to accept the granting of full citizenship en masse to more than 1 million immigrants of ethnic Chinese and ethnic Indian origins from China and India respectively. In so doing, especially in the context of the time, they demonstrated the rare example of ethnic grace ever to be shown by an indigenous population towards their foreign guests. And that was my first time encountering this phrase, ethnic grace. And I thought it beautifully captures the historic, very unique historic moment in which gave birth to our country. The magnanimity displayed on the part of Malays spared Malaysia the strife that afflicted other multiracial, multi-religious countries as they struggled to forge a new post-colonial national identity. But the struggle continues. It is not easy. We have to, for an inclusive Ummah, there must be give and take. For the good of the whole, we have to meet in the middle, to meet halfway. And this is how Professor Osman describes it. In a religiously plural society, no religion can hope to enjoy a total freedom of public expression of its belief and practices as some or all of its followers wish. In Malaysia, many Muslims feel that as the sole official religion, Islam should be fully practiced and implemented by the community as well as by the state. But in reality, this is not the case, much to the dismay to many Muslims. Similarly, many non-Muslims feel strongly that the Constitution entitles them to a complete freedom to practice and develop their respective religion without any impediment or constraint from the authorities. Again, the reality is different and much to their dismay. The message is that we have to give up something in order to keep us whole together as one family. Without question, Malaysia's ability to hold together as a pluralistic society is due to the demand imposed by the country's founding fathers upon all, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, to meet halfway in order to secure the public space needed for coexistence. This self-restraint on the part of the Muslim majority underscores the Malay civilization's fortitude and judicious temperament, traits that have in no small measure helped sustain Malaysia as a uniquely diverse, moderate Muslim country. And in many ways, this same Malay ethos is manifestly displayed in the private and public persona of Professor Osman Bakar, the Muslim intellectual exuding a distinct empathy for the other and curiosity for the wider world of ideas. Let me just now close by reading verbatim the conclusion that I had in my chapter. The September 11 tragedy plunged the Islamic world and the Christian West into the first post-Cold War conflict of the Clash of Civilization era. In the past decades, China's rise has compounded the civilization tension, turning it into a multipolar contention. These adverse developments set the backdrop of Osman Bakar's lifelong commitment to civilizational dialogue. For Osman, the foreboding clash is not inevitable. The world's civilization can and should coexist, but the process must begin from within, with each religious and philosophical traditions living up to their respective ideals. He exhorted his fellow Muslims to move beyond mere tolerance and to actively engage with others so as to advance the fate of humanity in the here and now. Even as he extols civilizational collaboration, Professor Osman is mindful of the imperative to reconcile the tension between orthodoxy and heterodoxy, tension and faith, earthly and the heavenly, and that in order to achieve harmonious coexistence, every member in our invariably diverse human family must be prepared to meet halfway for the good of the whole, as was the case with Malaysia. Introspective yet inquisitive, Professor Osman understood the need to embrace a universal and yet at the same time remain grounded in the particularity of his Malay and Islamic roots. This acumen for the middle pathway defined Professor Osman's life and scholarship and drove his ceaseless pursuit for a unified yet diversified civilizational coexistence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peter Chen. And I think Dr. Peter Chen made a very, very powerful point there, that at the end of the day, when we look at the scholarship of Professor Osman Bakar, we must never forget that it is very much grounded in the Malay, Southeast Asian, and the Islamic experience in this part of the world. And precisely because of that, there is a lot of emphasis in Professor Osman Bakar's work on the bridging of different traditions in different civilizations. Now, before we move on to the next two speakers, I would like to open up to the floor for any questions. We will have about 3 minutes for question and answers, and then we'll give about a few other minutes for our speakers, and then a last round of question and answers. Is there anybody who has anything to ask our first two speakers, or any general questions about Prof. Osman Bakar's and things related to the topic? You may go to any one of the microphones to ask your questions, or such a small place so you can just speak up and ask. Anyone? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, I guess at the level of the university, you have to have courses on philosophy. As it is right now, I think through the efforts of Prof. Osman, many different faculties are offering philosophy of the discipline. Okay, so how the instructors got there, that is beyond me. Because in other words, if they are teaching philosophy of religion and they have been in that field as the area of specialization in the PhD or masters, at least they are equipped to do it. But if they are not, I think that is the greatest problem. The problem is the problem of getting the instructor. So there must be, I think that is very crucial to have a department of philosophy or like institute like ISTAC here, where you have philosophical discourses and also philosophy of the various disciplines being taught, so that they can be dispersed to all the different universities. At the level of the schools, I would say that we want to introduce philosophy education in the sense of history of philosophy. What I've been trying to do is to introduce philosophical inquiry at the level of the students as a community of inquiry, where they are trained to do philosophy. In other words, they have to be able to ask questions, not just agree without any reasons. They have to be able to give evidence and examples. They have to ask for justifications. So I mean, actively doing this so that they are training their mind in what we call critical thinking, not just the theory. Even I know, for example, in the training of teachers in all universities, since 1996, they taught a course called critical and creative thinking skills. But what I found out was that basically is a theory of critical and creative thinking. The teachers do not have the how-do. They don't have the know-how. So that's why we come with this project and we train teachers so that they can do it. And students like this so much because for the first time, they say they can speak in the classroom. All this while they were listening. But with the community of inquiry, using philosophical inquiry, they ask a lot of questions and the teacher has to be prepared. Not to say that teachers have all the answers, but to be prepared to discuss it further. You know? So I think there are different means at the higher education and at the basic primary and secondary education. I mean, the person in the university in charge of the curriculum, they have the one to come up with this. But like in the past, the TITAS was from the Ministry of Higher Education, and then it was carried out. And then Dr. Mazli came with the falsafah issue semasa, philosophy and current issues, and leave it to the university to implement it. So I think the success is very ambiguous. So that's it. But every university has a curriculum committee. So if they read what Prof. Osman has been doing, so I think they should do something. Start a philosophy department, like what Sir Nas was also calling out. Okay?
So to just continue from what Professor Rosnani was saying, the problem is not a philosophical problem. The fact that we don't have philosophical classes in university doesn't mean that we lack philosophy teachers, or we don't have a philosophy curriculum, or that we don't see the importance of philosophy. The big problem in most Muslim societies, it's not only a Malaysian problem, you can see the same thing also in Nigeria, in many Muslim countries all over the world, is the problem that Prof. Osman mentioned just now during his speech. The issue of looking at the curriculum again and to be objectively criticizing the curriculum such that it could be improved further. And I think this is the issue that we have, where there is no real effort to audit again these courses and try to make them better by being very brutally honest about what the issues are. And in the West, they are able to do that because they are very critical of the very product that they produce. And especially when it comes to classes related to humanities and philosophy. And that leads me to our next speaker actually, Professor Zaid Ahmad, because I've spoken I've spoken with him about this at one of the Putrajaya food truck about the issue of the crisis of higher education in Malaysia. Professor Zaid Ahmad is an old hand in the field. He is a professor of philosophy and civilization studies, or formerly the professor of philosophy and civilization studies at the University Putra, Malaysia, and currently still active post-retirement. He's an honorary Secretary General of the Malaysian Historical Society. A lot of his books and articles are now published in many popular platforms. But I would like to highlight his very powerful book called The Epistemology of Ibn Khaldun, which is a philosophical study of the philosophy philosophy of Ibn Khaldun. It's such an interesting book for the students here. Please check it out, and if you cannot get a copy, you can ask Prof for PDF. But Prof has published hundreds of other journals, chapters, proceedings, and even many lectures overseas. Maybe Prof, you can also kind of reflect some of the concerns that we have now about the crisis of philosophy teaching in universities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Said Khairuddin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good afternoon. My fellow panelists, distinguished Professor Dato Osman Bakar, and hadirin dan hadirat yang dapat hadir pada petang ini. Alhamdulillah. It is actually a very challenging task for me to speak in front of you at this time. We have had a good lunch just now, and now you have to sit down and listen to maybe sometime a serious discussion on philosophy discussion, things like that. But I will try to take not too much time, inshallah. Actually, when I was contacted to participate in this forum, so I was thinking that what should I say, because I am not one of the like our two previous panelists who contributed to this volume. And I was thinking that my task this afternoon is perhaps, number one is to give my reflection on this book, this thick book, a scary book for some people, because when you see, the size of the book, because we like to buy thin book nowadays, and probably number two, around the man in the center of this book, which is Professor Dato Osman Bakar. I just prepared some note here, Well, first of all, I'm very highly grateful to the organizer for this invitation, and to participate in this to me, is very meaningful event. And I feel very much honored, and I feel very small as well, to stand in front of you. And of course, to take part of in this forum, in conjunction with the launching of the festive in honor of the distinguished Professor Dato Osman Bakar. I think for this book, we have to first congratulate the editor of the book. The most important man behind the book is in front of us. Congratulations, very big congratulations to the editor, Professor Said Khairuddin, who has done a good job. I know this is not easy. It's tiring work. Editing such there are about 20 over chapters in here, written by different people. In the history of scholarship worldwide, not only in Malaysia, actually not many scholars who had the privilege to obtain an honor of a fellowship like this. There are so many professors, but not all professors who have this, this opportunity or an honor to have this kind of book written in honor of him. Of course, conventionally understood, a fellowship is a compilation of writings honoring an achievement of a distinguished, respected scholar. In other words, this is a publication or I should say a celebratory writing in honor of an academic extraordinaire. And this is not meant for ordinary scholars. It has to be a very special one, a special person. Studies in honor of a scholar are symbolic, academic flattering by his fellow academic, colleagues, or student. A person of that stature is not an average academician. That's what our Prime Minister has mentioned this morning. Yeah? And in Malaysia, this tradition is not very much practiced. Perhaps we can hardly count, very little, works of this kind. In Malaysia. I've been, like some of our friends here in academic, more than 30 years now. Yeah. And in this context, I think this volume of fellowship is vital and dedicated to Professor Osman, a person whom I would say, I personally regard as one of the best minds of our nation. One of the best minds of our nation. One of the best minds our nation has produced. And as the Dato Anwar in his foreword here described Professor Osman as a polymath. And of course, I would very much agree with that. And perhaps we can also call Professor Osman a Renaissance man, maybe. I have encountered my personal experience now. I have encountered Professor Osman probably more than 20 years since then. More than 20 years, I know him. Since he was in the University of Malaya. At that time, I was a young lecturer representing UPM, attending meetings chaired by Professor Osman about Islamic and Asian civilization at that time. And my presence was not noticeable at that time. He didn't know me, actually. Yeah? I was in the meeting many times, chaired by Professor Osman at that time. I was a young lecturer. Despite, of course, I was born in a kampung, not far from his kampung, about 5 kilometers away. Yeah? But because of probably generation gap, I didn't know him when I was small. Except I can tell you one story. When I was in primary school, one of my teachers told us in the class, there was a brilliant student, a brilliant boy from Kampung Bukit Lada who studied in England at that time. That's the story that I only know at that time, I didn't know him. So, and later on, I found that that person was Professor Osman Bakar. Ada satu cikgu bagi tahu pada masa itu. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather today here in ISTAC not only to recognize the seminal contribution of this great man to philosophy and civilizational discourse, but also to acknowledge his idealism and activism, as well as the goal and directions he represents in contemporary Islamic thought. His works and activism in intellectual sphere over the past 50 or more years have given us a precious inspiration. It also reflects his tireless commitment and strive towards epistemological and civilizational reform, as you always mention. He has undertaken and propagated more than half a century. The editor of this volume, Professor Khairuddin himself, in the title of your introduction, you put it in the form of a question, why Osman Bakar matters. I agree. There are so many things that we can learn from Professor Osman. He's not only a man of ideas, but also a public intellectual who has never distanced himself from the practical problem facing the society. Although he wrote a magnum on the classification of knowledge in Islam, but I would describe Professor Osman as a scholar who is very difficult to classify. Professor Osman is a versatile person who masters many things, many disciplines. The compilation of this Festschrift in honor of Professor Osman Bakar to me is timely. It comes out in a time where discourse or intellectual debates on pertinent matters or pertinent issues is no longer prevalent in the current academic culture. Again, in the foreword, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim lamented in his foreword, unfortunately, Malay scholarship has been plagued by dastardly stereotypes which Osman has sought to put to rest. I quote, unquote, from forward. This Festschrift generally touched various aspects of knowledge, tradition, and civilization that has been the academic playground of Professor Osman since his young age. The idealism that he advocates is shared in a very refreshing manner by the contributors who happen to be his friends, his colleagues, as well as his acquaintances and students. It is also inspirational and very appropriate to the scenario happening in the Muslim world in particular, and of course can be used as the guide to understanding of the framework of a civilization that parallels the demands and atmosphere of current sociopolitics. A total of 22 brilliant contributions by prominent scholars cover major fields of contemporary discourse of knowledge, tradition, and civilization, as reflected in the title of the book. And this book is divided into two major parts, namely the production and problem of knowledge and civilizational unity and renewal. This is an important, I mean, if you talk about knowledge, why there is a problem in knowledge? Knowledge is not neutral. Knowledge is not value-free. Knowledge is value-laden. Knowledge is developed within the milieu of a certain social background. Yeah? So that is why we have to address this problem of knowledge. You know? Lately, you know, in most of the what do you call it, post-colonial discourse, yeah? Most of the former colonized nation, yeah? There is a movement in academic to decolonize knowledge, to decolonization of knowledge, because we have to get rid of the colonized influence in our knowledge. But decolonization of knowledge is not enough. We have to also indigenize our knowledge. So that is where the concept of Tawhidic epistemology that Professor Osman proposed is essential for us to understand. Because we have to have the right concept of knowledge based on our own belief system and values. Out of the 22 chapters, I count six chapters deal directly with Professor Osman's thought and ideas as depicted in the very title of the chapter, while the rest bring up debates on various subjects under the umbrella of knowledge, tradition, and civilization studies. Reading the chapters from the preface, forward, and introduction is indeed very inspiring and would make us feel closer to the thoughts and personality of Professor Osman. As we know him better, we would be able to understand how he positioned himself in dealing with issues pertaining to epistemology, knowledge, clash of ideas between Islam and the West, for example. The Muslim world, often regarded as anathema to civil society, despite the fact that it has rich traditions of associational life pursuing common good. These religious resources have been reinterpreted for the enhancement of civic virtues and participatory politics in contemporary contexts, that is democratization. Such pioneering efforts have been clearly observable in Muslim Southeast Asia. In Malaysia, Professor Osman stands as among the pioneers of the idea of civilizational dialogue. And of course, Professor Osman was instrumental in establishing Pusat Dialog Peradaban in Indonesia Malaya in the late 1996. I still remember when all public universities were instructed by the ministry to offer compulsory courses. At that time, Islam and Asian Civilization, acronym TITAS. And that, of course, that instruction is top down, then we have to do that. And of course, as at that time I was head of department. As head of department, I benefited a lot. I got a lot of staff from the Pusat Dialog Peradaban to teach these courses in my university at that time. Through the process of synthesizing the thoughts of Islamic figures from various fields, Professor Osman developed his idea of in a contemporary form. His fresh ideas often become a reference for the Islamic intellectual movement in understanding knowledge, tradition, and civilization. Osman thought has a special place among academia. particularly in Malaysia. Based on personal account happened to be Prof. Osman's good friend, Dato Osman Sharifuddin. I think you happen to be his classmate, yeah? Dato. Since your student days. Yeah? Osman's thoughts has also been influenced by many other scholars and thinkers, particularly his own professors. Among the thinkers who greatly inspired him, including Professor Nassar, we heard this morning, yeah? Professor Al-Attas, Professor Faruqi, and so on and so forth. He often refers to talk about the thoughts of these figures and then develops these ideas and then introduce his own ideas. It is interesting to see Prof. Osman and his role as an intellectual and at the same time an activist of the Islamic movement. Although he is an activist of the Islamic movement especially, but he's neither a politician nor a political leader. I think he'd never been a politician. Who is directly governing and competing as a representative of the people and so on. Professor Osman is an intellectual activist who is a thinker and think tank to the contemporary Islamic movement. The role played by him is to pattern and produce ideas and thoughts through intellectual activism. Professor Osman is an intellectual reformist who plans his thought through activism. Among his achievements in terms of intellectual contribution is his ability to synthesize and harmonize knowledge, tradition, and civilization. He sees that there are some epistemological problems between the Western tradition and the Islamic world. He took that other's task to provide answers as to how to deal with the epistemic hegemony of the Western knowledge tradition. Perhaps among the significant contribution of Professor Osman is the epistemological renewal. His proposal of Tawhidic epistemology is the answer to the secular colonial conception of knowledge. His work was translated and welcomed in many countries. His book, Classification of Knowledge in Islam, is perhaps more popular outside Malaysia than in Malaysia itself. Among the proof of recognition of contribution and thought, he was awarded one of the awards. Yeah? He has got so many awards. The Farabi International Award. Yeah? And this recognition also proves that Professor Osman is a world-class Muslim intellectual who has made contribution from the point of view of international relations, especially between the Islamic world and the Western society. This recognition clearly proves how much the contribution of Professor Osman's thoughts had an impact and influence the socio-political approach, especially to the Islamic movement. In addition to receiving various recognition and contributions, he was always humble and insisted on the principle of struggle that is not individual but comprehensive and collective. He insisted that the conflict between the West and the Islamic world is not true, and that the West and the Islamic world can understand each other and has a harmonious relationship. Finally, I must say that Professor Osman is a multi-talented scholar in his own class, a very committed thinker, activist par excellence. Professor Osman, the Renaissance man. From you we'll learn so much and so many. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Zaid. I really would like to apologize to all of those who are present here today. We exceeded the time a little bit, but please endure with us because we have a lot of interesting insights from many of our speakers. The last speaker for the day is Mr. Yusmadi Yusof, who's currently, I was just told that he's also a PhD student right now in ISTAC. He is actually a senior lawyer and politician. And why we have him here today is because we want perspectives from practitioners and not only people who are within the academe. He was also a member of parliament, a senator at the Dewan Negara, who was elected as a member of the Dewan Rakyat, the Parliament of Malaysia. Aside from his legal practice and political activities, he's very much involved in international leadership and scholastic initiatives through his affiliations with many established institutions. We would like to welcome him as someone who's not only, as Professor Zaid was saying just now, one who's interested in scholarship, but also someone who's an activist who has been given many prestigious awards and honors for his public service. Mr. Yusmadi.
I think first of all, Prof, Festival is not about something to be upset. When you assign me to study about Festival, I find Festival about celebrating and intellectuals. So today I feel the ambience a bit slightly sad. I think big hand to Prof. Osman. Because, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. And thank you, Dr. Khairuddin and panels. I wonder, what would be the more strategic reason, if any, that Prof. Osman or Dr. Khairuddin get me involved in this session? I think the only reason I may think, if any, what Prof. Osman been doing since his MCKK days, Yayasan Anda, London, mathematics, algebra, Philadelphia, and come back, Science Academy, Islamic Science Academy, is for me, is formulating an agenda of the 21st century leadership project. Why I say so? Been shortly trained in the South, they say you only have 3 points. That's how that part of the world, where I was there for 6 months, they said, at best we have 3 points. So I have only 3 points, don't worry. I will shorten my speech. Point number one, why I said so, if I were to diagnose this book, I think one word missing, and we'll be doing unjust to Professor Osman. Knowledge, traditions, and civilization, but I want to add another word, what I call leadership. Leadership. Because I know Prof. Osman, if I were to put in the context of leadership, many people think that they talk about leadership. Leadership is not about nut and bolt. Leadership is not about management. Leadership is beyond that. And sometimes, out of all definitions of leadership, it boils down to one little thing. When someone said he's a leader, when he turned back, whether he has followers or not. You can be super duper smart, you can be loud, you can be whatsoever. Leaders always have followers. And I have to congratulate Prof. Osman today. I've seen in this hall that all of them at intellectual level, at management level, administrative level, are the followers of the enlightened ideas of Prof. Osman. That is Prof. Osman. Why is it so? How does it relevant in the realm of leadership? For example, I was lucky in a way because I happened to be born in 1974, 1981, I have standard 1, in balik pulau, and then after that I realized, look here, my mom just said that, Ismadi, I just expect you to go to university. I didn't expect much. It's just like your mother, simple, suri rumah. But he said, Ismadi, go to university, come back and teach at our mosque. And I was lucky. Out of the prayer of my mother, he said, no, you go to the Islamic school. So I went to Al-Mashor, another great school, established by another great enlightened scholar, Sheikh Al-Hadi, happened to be one of the shepherds as well. So when you went there, of course, you say, what's next? Okay, you went to International College Islam. I don't go to MCKK, not to Kuala Kangsar. I was in Kampung Jawa. But all this institution is a product of that someone tried to build something, and that something has to be in context, which is Malaysia. So when I've been listening to Professor Rosna, the history of how the education be built, to put in context. So then whatever challenges the question asks, shortcomings, but what are we, where are we now? So then I went to UIA, I was lucky again. because there's another resemblance of enlightened person by the name of the late almarhum Professor Ahmad Ibrahim, who himself is a scholar of common law, name it. I mean, one of the best brains. But he knows the limitation of common law and he needs to formulate it. And he, thank you for UC Malaya. He went to UC Malaya, I think invited by Nku Aziz, another great man. And of course, he said, look here, I need to formulate something else. That's the way I interpret it. And he built International Islamic University. Can you imagine a young student went to university? First of all, you have to learn about the law. The LLB, typical LLB. In between, you learn about Islamic law. In between, you have to do comparative. I mean, not everyone is like Ahmad Ibrahim. But that what? Okay. One good day, I was leading law student associations. I take different stand here for this session so that you see how things works, how these enlightened ideas navigate actually. So I still remember at that time, students was not very happy after Malaysian Bar Council, Andrew here. Out of a sudden, the Solicitor General Heliyah criticized what happened to the graduate of International Islamic University post 1991 or 1992, not when we started 1985. Prof. Ahmad Ibrahim was so upset. Every other night, he would stay back in the office. I know I saw, because I was in the law student session. He himself took the trouble and checked all the papers. So being student leaders, everyone came. Yusmari, you must speak to the professor. So I went there with Samsul Iskandar, currently the chief political secretary of Anwar Ibrahim. I said, Pansri, what happened is this. You know, Yusmari, look here. I want to do change. I want to do reform. Yes, if I want to make it easy, I'll take someone from all good universities, can speak good English, but I take those from Islamic school who are not very much proficient in English, if English matters. Because for me to do change, I need numbers, I need peoples, I need human capital. From there, I understand. So for me, the way I interpret Prof. Osman, Prof, the way you try when you told me that when you were entrusted to lead UC Malaya at a very young age, you said you also responsible to reform. Just now you used the very diplomatic word, you said to be review. When you reform or you restructure, the very pengajian Islam and academic Islam become asasi, am I right? So for me, you have done that. That's why it produced. But maybe now it's about time to review it again. Okay. Why I said so here? For me, I have the benefits to roaming around between tower and forum. What I mean by tower is those from the university, intellectuals. Forum is someone from politics, Anwar Ibrahim. So I'm roaming around in between, but can you imagine to articulate what Deklarasi Pematang said? You must cause islah kama stata'tum, but at the same time in the appreciation of the great Asian civilization culture. That is in the Deklarasi Pematang. Can you imagine? The enlightened leader who spoke this morning articulate that vision as early as 1990, last 24 years, in Pematang, and it was consistent until today. That's what it caused change. So for me, in between, that's what I saw, the interaction, the collaboration between Professor Osman Bakar, which happened just as good as like Dead Poet Society. I know you're maram munjangan, I read about it, I don't want to talk about it here. But what I'm trying to say, because of the leadership of Prof. Osman, who know how to put himself at the right place. Let's say, for example, if he tempting about power, his best friend was the most powerful guy before 1998. Did he ever try to abuse that relationship? No. He created his own path, get his achievement. In fact, it's not wrong for me to say, when I know that the idea behind the establishments of the center where you were, and I was there, maybe one and only Malaysian seat in Anwar Ibrahim's class in Georgetown, also involved his thinking behind it. So for me to have an ideas, but to put in reality, to curate it well, but now it's more challenging with digital media, whatnot. So I think he has done that effectively, successfully, and I think he deserves to have this festive. But the only thing I'll be upset is supposed to be in the center. It's supposed to be the pengantin. Pengantin cannot be at the corner. So I think I have to say it, but no one can say it because I'm a politician, I want to say it. To celebrate a scholar, I think even we are taught in Al-Quran, orang ilmuwan, tinggi makam dia, tempat tinggi. So I think maybe next time, we have to put our scholars, especially for Feshrif, in the middle. Can we everyone agree or disagree? But I can say it, Prof. Murad, you cannot say it. Let me say it. All right. Second point is this. Just now I said, look here. That is the context. Second point is this. What he has done for me when I read this, I try to read back to back, is this. In Feshrif of John Esposito, Tamara's son gave a topic, do you know about it? Overcoming Orientalism. Overcoming Orientalism. So there are all the John Volts, all the, all the usual suspect wrote. But for Prof. Osman, as his name, the special name given by his mother, OS for me, Prof, if I'm wrong, I'm not your student, you can punish me. You can punish me. You can punish me. For me, OS means is this. If Esposito tried to overcome Orientalism, for me, Prof. Osman is Orientalism beyond. Why is it Orientalism beyond? When Edward Said criticized, you know how the West portrayed the East. And of course, Anwar Ibrahim will use that. It's not clash of civilization, but clash of ignorance. Okay. But for me, Prof. Osman, go beyond that. Why I used to, I hope I'm right or I can be wrong. Why is the word Orientalism for you? Because, let's say, to understand the philosophical material in this part of the world, who are the scholars? Who are the writers? What are the references? He had to travel all the way to Temple to look for a scholar activist who are in exile. Can you imagine? No one here. And of course, at the same time, Professor Said Najib Al-Attas, of course, McGill and so many other places. So for me, why I call it Orientalism in that sense, but he go beyond. And for me, the big elephant in the room in most academic institution or intellectual institution for me is parochialism of knowledge. So for me, Prof. Osman, through his leadership, he managed to break that parochialism of knowledge. Why is it so? The danger of parochialism, I have to say, sometimes is more dangerous than racism, where you cannot see. It's very much implicit. But Prof. Osman not only interested to know about his Malay roots, but he also interested to know about the others and make the others comfortable, and his pursuits of, from your point of view, to find the middle ground, which is, for me, I call it wasatiyah, moderation, as what was encouraged by my religion. I think he managed to break that parochialism of knowledge. The reason I said so, Prof, in my realm of leadership, it's very dangerous when someone comes with a parochial mindset. They can only see from their parameters, but they cannot see from the other side. But I think through your intellectual pursuit, you manage to build that ammunition for someone like me, I hope, and also someone like Dr. Mazli, who has to navigate in the real territory, where that territory is what I call it, the only place in the world where major civilizations are interacting. Malaysia is a place where I always argue the only place where major civilizations are interacting. Major civilization, Muslim, Chinese, Indian, European. But what's different from some other part of the world? The social interaction of this interaction happened in the mainstream. It didn't happen at fringe. So for me, the total effect, at best, let's say I take 60 years, since 1957, for me, is something need to be further explained for someone like me who have to navigate in another place which also from modern human civilization have built civilization. From my limited research, there are 3 institutions somehow managed to build a modern human civilization effectively. Number 1 is monastery. Number 2, universities. Number 3, parliament. Can you imagine if what you are discussed here somehow cannot even be brought into parliament and turns out to be a public law or public policy? Because the business of public policy is business of state. It's not a business of NGO. It's not even a business of university. So if what always builds an institution, of course, is public policy, vision, public policy, and law. But sometimes they don't even understand. They say law first. No. So for me, I have to go to my third point, is this. Why Feshrif today matters? For me, I was so excited when Prof. Osman shared with me a short special message from Syed Hussein Nas. Prof, for your record, I want to tell audience, a moment I saw that video, I cannot sleep. Why? I thought now I'm a politically unemployed, so I have to come back as a student. But when he said that, no, the time even right and much needed now. So for me, if whatever exercises that Prof. Osman has done for the last maybe 50 years, cannot be a syllabus to produce enlightened leaders and further to create enlightened followers. What more further to create enlightened policy? I think renaissance, whatever islah, whatever tajdid, renewal that we inspire will never happen. So I conclude that this phase 3, Professor Khairuddin and my panelists, my audience, is a product, if cannot be, is an agenda to formulate a leadership syllabus of 21st century. I invite a question from all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, fellow panelists, for all the very enlightening comments. I'm afraid we do not have any time left for any questions, but I would like to conclude this whole session first by thanking the audience for being here, but more importantly to mention what Prof. Osman Bakar once told me. And whenever I have conversations with Prof. Osman Bakar, he would not talk only about the present, but about the future. In as much as we celebrate the contributions of Professor Osman Bakar, we need now to also think about the future. It is not enough to remember the scholars that are there in our civilization. It is important for us to produce more scholars like Professor Osman Bakar. So for those young people who are listening in, for PhD students, postgraduate students, would-be scholars and budding intellectuals, I have to say 3 things just to echo Mr. Yusmadi, that we need to have in ourselves to produce someone like Professor Osman Bakar. The first is humility in the face of knowledge. And this is a defining feature and characteristic of Professor Osman Bakar. This wanting to know and wanting to learn and to be humble once again, to be a student on the feet of someone who's more knowledgeable than you. That's the first. The second is the respect for tradition. The crisis of our time is that we have people who live in the here and now. But what Prof. Osman Bakar has told us in many of his writings is that if we want to be powerful scholars and thinkers and intellectuals for the future, we must first go back to the tradition and respect the tradition. Respecting the tradition means you have to know the tradition, you have to love the tradition, and you have to reinvent the tradition. And the third thing that we can learn from Professor Osman Bakar as we seek to produce more Professor Osman Bakar in the future is the commitment to the reformation of civilization. And this commitment to the reformation of civilization is waning, is declining, it's really disappearing in the day and age that we are in, where people are living in the present and in love with the tech and the devices that they have. We need to produce people who are not becoming scholars simply because they want to be called professors. We need to produce intellectuals not because they want to drive fancy cars. We need to produce activists not because they want to win awards, medals, accolades, and to be praised by politicians and by leaders, but we need to produce scholars, thinkers, intellectuals who are committed to the reformation of civilization for us to produce a better civilization for Islam, for non-Muslims, for humankind as a whole. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Prof. Al-Junaid and the rest of the panelists. Professor Dr. Rusnani Hashim from IIUM, Associate Professor Dr. Peter Chang from UM, Professor Dr. Zaid Ahmad from UPM, and Mr. Yusmadi Yusuf, a former senator. Ladies and gentlemen, many of us have special memories of the books that have inspired us, and we learn the profound effect that reading the right book we have read. Yeah? In our case, we are lucky. The book we are lucky to be here to listen, okay, to what is the best about this book, Knowledge, Tradition and Civilizations, Essays in Honor of Professor Osman Bakar. We even experienced to listen to this polymath, Professor Dato Dr. Osman Bakar, through the chapters written by great scholars and achievers, friends of his, by the way, mashallah. So ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the organizer, I hope that this intellectual discussion could benefit us all, hoping that there will be more similar sessions to spread knowledge, and even as mentioned by Prof. Aljunied just now, to have or to create more Professor Osman Bakar, inshallah. Thank you again to Prof. Aljunied and the rest of the panelists. And ladies and gentlemen, moving on to the next agenda, we have come to the end of the forum. As a gesture of appreciation to the moderator and the panelists, I now invite Associate Professor Dr. Muhammad Feham Mat Ghalib, the Deputy Dean of ISTAC-IIUM, and accompanied by Professor Dato Dr. Osman Bakar himself, to present tokens of our gratitude to the moderator, Professor Dr. Syed Khairuddin Aljunied, and the rest of the panelists. So moving on to the a token to Professor Aljunied. Muhammad from There's refreshment outside just after this. And stay safe everyone. I am Shahrizad Saidul Haj again. We'll now sign off. And please do not forget to recite Umur Kitab, supposed to be in the early just now. But now please do not forget to recite Tasbih Kafarah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.